Lena Hart discovered she was getting married the same moment she realized she'd been sold. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering across marble as her father's whispered confession cut through the orchestra's waltz. I had no choice, baby girl. The debt was too deep. And across the candlelit ballroom, a man she'd never met lifted his glass in acknowledgement, his eyes cold as January steel. Victor Romano. The name alone made grown men cross themselves. And in exactly 17 minutes, according to the officiant now approaching with practiced sympathy, he would own her completely. Not as a wife, as collateral, as revenge dressed in white lace. Welcome to my story. Stay until the end, because this wedding is just the beginning of a war neither of us knew we were fighting. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this tale of captivity and cold vengeance travels. Termalke, the Roosevelt Hotel, had seen 1,000 weddings, but none quite like this. Lena stood in the bridal suite, staring at her reflection in a floor-length mirror that cost more than her college tuition. The dress was exquisite, Italian lace over silk, hand-beaded with crystals that caught the afternoon light like trapped stars. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. Someone had taken her measurements without her knowledge, planned this moment down to the last detail, orchestrated an entire wedding while she'd believed she was simply attending one. You look beautiful, sweetheart. Her father's voice cracked behind her. She didn't turn around. Couldn't. If she looked at David Hart's face right now, she might actually break something valuable. Or someone. When? The word came out flat, emotionless. Shock did that. Wrapped around your throat like cold hands and squeezed until feeling became a luxury you couldn't afford. Lena, please. When did you sell me? She met his eyes in the mirror, watched him flinch. I deserve at least that much truth, don't I? Before you walk me down the aisle to a complete stranger? David Hart had once been a proud man, owned 3 restaurants in Manhattan, wore custom suits, drove a Tesla, sent his only daughter to Columbia. That man had disappeared somewhere between the bad investments and worse decisions, leaving behind this hollow-eyed ghost who couldn't meet her gaze. 6 months ago, he whispered. The gambling debts. I was in too deep with the wrong people. They were going to kill me, Lena. Romano made an offer. An offer. She laughed, sharp and bitter. Is that what we're calling it? A bargain. My life for your cooperation. My cooperation. The words tasted like ashes. You mean my entire future. My freedom. My life. He stepped closer, reaching for her shoulder. She jerked away, and something in his face crumbled completely. He promised you wouldn't be hurt, David said desperately, that you'd be protected, provided for. Protected from what? The situation you put me in? Lena's hands trembled as she gripped the vanity edge. The manicure they'd given her this morning was perfect, pale pink polish gleaming. Someone else's hands. Someone else's life. Did it ever occur to you to ask me? To give me a choice? There was no choice. These men, they don't negotiate. They don't... You had a choice. Her voice dropped to something dangerous, something she didn't recognize in herself. You chose yourself. You chose your life over mine. Don't dress it up as protection. The door opened without a knock. A woman entered, early 50s, elegant in charcoal silk, with the kind of posture that suggested military training or dance. Her eyes swept over Lena with professional assessment. It's time, she said simply. No introduction, no sympathy. I need another minute, David started, but the woman cut him off with a look that could freeze fire. Mr. Romano doesn't wait. The guests are seated. The officiant is ready. She turned to Lena. Your bouquet is waiting downstairs. White roses and calla lilies, very traditional. How thoughtful. Lena's sarcasm rolled off the woman like water off stone. Indeed. I'm Mrs. Chen, Mr. Romano's head of household. You'll see me often in your new life. She paused, and something almost like pity flickered across her features. A word of advice, Mrs. Romano. Dignity will serve you better than defiance. He respects strength, but not theatrics. I'm not Mrs. Romano yet. Semantics. You became his property the moment your father signed the contract. This, she gestured at the dress, the suite, The farce unfolding around them is merely paperwork. Property. The word hit like a slap, and Lena felt the last of her composure crack. But she didn't cry. Wouldn't give them that. Instead, she straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and met Mrs. Chen's gaze with every ounce of heart pride she could summon. Then let's get the paperwork done. The ballroom was obscene in its beauty. Thousands of white roses cascaded from crystal chandeliers. Candles flickered on every surface, throwing soft light across tables draped in cream silk. A string quartet played something classical and mournful, Pachelbel maybe, or one of those composers whose music was made for moments that looked perfect but felt wrong. 200 guests filled gilt chairs on either side of a white carpet runner. Lena recognized maybe 20 of them, distant relatives, her father's former business associates, people who'd shown up out of obligation or curiosity. The rest were strangers. Victor Romano's world, dressed in designer labels and quiet menace. She could feel their eyes on her as David led her toward the altar, assessing, judging, wondering what kind of woman agreed to marry a man like Romano. If they only knew she'd learned about this wedding the same way they had, through an invitation that arrived 2 weeks ago on expensive cardstock. You are cordially invited to witness the union of Victor Romano and Lena Hart. She'd laughed when she first saw it, assumed it was a joke, some kind of scam. Her father had explained carefully, face pale and hands shaking, that it was real, that he'd made arrangements, that she should consider it an honor to be chosen by someone so powerful. You'll have everything you need, he'd promised. Security, wealth, respect, everything except freedom, she'd countered. He hadn't had an answer for that. Now, walking this endless aisle, Lena focused on breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Each step brought her closer to the man waiting at the altar, and she forced herself to look at him properly for the first time. Victor Romano was not what she expected. The rumors painted him as a monster, a ruthless enforcer who'd built an empire on fear and blood, who'd taken over his father's organization at 25 and expanded it into something vast and untouchable. People whispered his name in the same breath as words like merciless and cruel, said he'd once burned down an entire building because someone had dared to steal from him. But the man standing beneath an arch of white roses looked more like a corporate executive than a crime lord. Early 30s, maybe. Tall and lean in a custom tuxedo that probably cost more than a car. Dark hair, precisely cut. Features that might have been handsome if they weren't so carefully blank, so completely devoid of warmth. His eyes, though. Gray like storm clouds, like frozen water. They tracked her approach with the intensity of a predator watching prey, and when they met hers, Lena saw something that made her blood run cold. Satisfaction. This wasn't business to him. This was personal. The quartet shifted to the wedding march, and the last few steps felt like walking through water. David's hand trembled on her arm. He was crying, she realized distantly, silent tears running down his cheeks as he prepared to give her away. "I'm sorry," he whispered as they reached the altar. "God help me, I'm so sorry." She didn't answer, just let him place her hand in Victor Romano's and stepped back into the audience, abandoning her to the stranger who'd bought her like property. Victor's hand was warm. She hadn't expected that. Hadn't expected the calluses on his palm or the gentleness of his grip as he turned her to face the officiant, an older man with kind eyes that didn't match the situation. "Dearly beloved," he began, and Lena stopped listening. Instead, she studied the man beside her from the corner of her eye. He stood perfectly still, face expressionless, looking straight ahead. Like this was a business meeting, a transaction, which she supposed it was. Speak now, or forever hold your peace. The silence stretched. No one objected. Of course they didn't. Who would dare? "Do you, Victor Alessandro Romano, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." His voice was deep, controlled, absolutely certain. The officiant turned to her. "And do you, Lena Marie Hart, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" This was it. Her last chance to refuse, to make a scene, to choose dignity over compliance. She could feel 200 pairs of eyes on her, waiting for her answer, wondering if she'd break, if she'd run. Victor's hand tightened slightly on hers, not painfully, just enough to remind her he was there, that he was real, that this was happening whether she liked it or not. Lena thought about her father's debts, about the men who would kill him if she refused, about the fact that she had exactly $1,247 in her checking account and a degree in art history that qualified her for exactly nothing that paid enough to hide from people like Victor Romano. She thought about dignity, about survival, about the difference between surrender and strategy. "I do," she said clearly, and meant, "for now." The officiant smiled like this was a real wedding, a real love story. "By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Victor turned to her, and for the first time something flickered in those cold gray eyes. He stepped closer, one hand lifting to cup her cheek. His thumb brushed her jaw, almost tender, and when he leaned down, Lena held perfectly still. Their lips met, soft, brief, chaste, a lie, like everything else about this moment. The guests applauded. The quartet swelled into something triumphant. Victor pulled back and offered his arm, and Lena took it because the alternative was standing there alone like a fool. They walked back down the aisle together, his hand covering hers on his sleeve. To anyone watching, they probably looked perfect, the powerful man and his beautiful bride, beginning their life together. No one could see the way her nails dug into his arm. No one could hear the way her breath came too fast, too shallow. No one knew that she was counting steps, counting seconds, counting heartbeats until she could be alone and scream. "Smile," Victor murmured as they passed the third row. "You're breaking their hearts." "Good," she whispered back. His laugh was so quiet she almost missed it. "I knew you'd have fire. Your father said you were stubborn." "My father doesn't know me at all." "No," Victor agreed. "I don't imagine he does." The reception was worse than the ceremony. They sat at a head table on a raised platform, literally above everyone else, like royalty presiding over their court. Servers brought course after course, food Lena couldn't taste, wine she desperately wanted to drink, but forced herself to refuse. She needed her wits sharp, her mind clear. Victor played his part flawlessly. He introduced her to his associates with his hand possessive on her lower back. He toasted their marriage with words about partnership and future. He even danced with her when the band started playing, holding her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat, steady and slow, like this was just another evening. "You're doing well," he said, as they swayed to some jazz standard. His hand spanned her waist, warm through the lace. Most women would have caused a scene by now. "Would you have preferred that?" She kept her eyes on his shoulder, unable to meet that knowing gaze. "Honestly, I'm not sure." His fingers flexed slightly. "Compliance is useful, but it's not as interesting." "I'm not here to interest you." "No," he agreed. "You're here because your father valued his life more than your freedom. Because I needed a wife for reasons you don't understand yet. Because sometimes the world doesn't give us choices, just consequences." Spoken like a man who's always had choices. "You'd be surprised." He guided her through a turn, and she hated how easily she followed. "I was 25 when my father was murdered. 25 when I inherited an empire built on violence and barely held together by fear. The choice I had was simple: become the monster they needed or watch everything he built burn. And you chose monster. I chose survival. For myself, for the people who depended on me, for a legacy I didn't ask for but couldn't abandon." His voice dropped lower, meant only for her. "We all make compromises, Lena. The only difference is some of us admit it." She finally looked up at him, really looked, saw the exhaustion hidden beneath the control, the weight of whatever burden he carried etched in the lines around his eyes. He wasn't that much older than her, maybe 7 or 8 years, but he seemed ancient in comparison, worn down by choices and consequences she couldn't begin to imagine. "Why me?" she asked. "If you needed a wife, you could have had anyone." Women who would have said yes willingly, who would have wanted this life. Because willing wives ask questions, make demands, expect love. His hand slid up her spine, casual and claiming. You, on the other hand, expect nothing, which makes you perfect. Perfect for what? Revenge, he said simply, and smiled at her shock. Did you really think this was about your father's debts, that I trade in human beings for money? The music swelled around them, and Lena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Then what? Later, Victor interrupted, glancing over her shoulder. We have an audience, and I have a reputation to maintain. Smile, Mrs. Romano. You're supposed to be happy. The song ended. He led her back to their table, and the night continued in a blur of champagne toasts and forced congratulations. People she'd never met offered advice about marriage. Women old enough to be her grandmother told her how lucky she was. Men gripped Victor's hand and looked at her like she was a trophy he'd won. Through it all, one word echoed in her mind. Revenge. They left the reception at midnight in a black Mercedes with tinted windows. No limousine, no fanfare. Just Victor helping her into the back seat with the same careful courtesy he'd shown all evening, then climbing in beside her as a driver she'd never seen pulled away from the hotel. Where are we going? Lena asked, her first words to him in 2 hours. Home. I have an apartment. Had, he corrected. Mrs. Chen cleared it out this morning. Your belongings are already at the penthouse. Of course they were. Because in Victor Romano's world, even her possessions didn't belong to her anymore. The drive took 40 minutes, through Manhattan's glittering streets, across the bridge, into a part of the city where old money met new power. The Mercedes pulled up to a building that was all glass and steel, impossibly tall, with a doorman who nodded at Victor like he was expecting them. The elevator rose in silence. Lena watched the floor numbers climb 30, 40, 50, until they reached the top and the doors opened directly into an apartment that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city spread out below like a carpet of light. The furniture was modern and expensive, all clean lines and neutral tones. Art that probably cost 6 figures hung on white walls. Everything was perfect, pristine, cold. Your room is down the hall, Victor said, shrugging out of his tuxedo jacket. Second door on the left. Mrs. Chen unpacked your things earlier. Lena turned to stare at him. My room? Did you think we'd be sharing? He loosened his bow tie with practiced ease, and she caught a glimpse of the tattoo that disappeared beneath his collar, something dark and intricate she couldn't quite make out. This is a business arrangement, Lena. I don't require access to your bed. The relief that flooded through her was so intense it almost hurt. Then what do you require? He walked to the bar, poured 2 fingers of something amber into a crystal glass. Didn't offer her any. Your presence, your cooperation in public, your silence about the nature of our arrangement. And in private? In private, you're free to hate me. He took a long drink, and something in his expression shifted, hardened. In fact, I'd prefer it. Affection would complicate things. Complicate your revenge, she said, remembering his words on the dance floor. Exactly. He set down his glass and turned to face her fully. You asked why you. Why? Out of all the women in New York, I chose David Hart's daughter to be my wife. Would you like to know? Part of her wanted to say no. Wanted to walk down that hallway to her room and lock the door and pretend none of this was happening. But the larger part, the part that refused to be a victim, even in a wedding dress she never chose, needed to understand. Tell me, 20 years ago, your uncle, Robert Hart, worked for my father. He was a bookkeeper, trusted, valued, given access to accounts most people never saw. Victor's voice went flat, emotionless, a recitation of facts. He embezzled over $5 million over the course of 2 years. When my father discovered the theft, Robert ran, disappeared, left behind a trail of false leads and emptied accounts. I don't see what this has to do with me. Because when my father went looking for that money, he found something else. Evidence that Robert had been feeding information to a rival family, the Castellanos. Details about shipments, meetings, weaknesses. And 1 week after your uncle vanished, the Castellanos used that information to set up an ambush. Lena felt cold spread through her chest. Victor, my father died in that ambush, along with 6 of his men. 7 people dead because your uncle decided 5 million wasn't enough. Because he wanted to be rich and didn't care who he destroyed to get there. I'm sorry, she whispered. God, I'm so sorry, but I didn't know. I know you didn't. He poured another drink and his hand was steady, perfectly controlled. You were what? 8 years old? 9? A child, innocent, completely unaware that your family was built on blood money. Then why am I here? If you know I had nothing to do with it, because Robert Hart is smart, too smart to be found through normal channels. He's been hiding for 20 years and every lead I've followed has turned up nothing. Victor moved closer and Lena forced herself not to step back. But a man like that, he keeps tabs on his family, makes sure his brother is okay, checks in on his niece. He's careful, but he's not heartless. Understanding hit her like ice water. You're using me as bait. I'm using you as a message, he corrected. When Robert hears that his niece married Victor Romano, that David Hart's daughter is now part of the family his betrayal destroyed, he'll react. Maybe he'll try to contact you. Maybe he'll try to take you. Either way, he'll surface. And when he does, you'll kill him. Yes. No hesitation, no apology, just cold certainty. I'll kill him, and the debt will be paid, and my father can finally rest. Lena sank onto the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. The dress pooled around her feet like spilled milk, all that beautiful lace wasted on a bride who was nothing more than a trap. You could have told me, she said finally. Before the wedding, you could have explained. Would you have agreed? She wanted to say yes, wanted to believe she'd have been brave enough, noble enough to sacrifice herself for her father's sins. But the truth was more complicated. I don't know, she admitted. Exactly. Victor crouched in front of her, bringing them eye to eye. This close, she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, the faint scar along his jaw. I needed you compliant, not conflicted. I needed you bound to me legally, publicly, irrevocably. This way there are no second thoughts, no backing out. You're mine until this is done. And after? When you've had your revenge? That depends. On what? His smile was sharp enough to cut. On whether you survive it. Her room was beautiful. Of course it was. A massive bed with white linens, a walk-in closet already filled with clothes she'd never bought, a bathroom done in marble and gold with a tub deep enough to drown in. Everything a woman could want, provided by a man who saw her as nothing more than a tool. Lena locked the door and leaned against it, finally alone. Finally able to stop performing, stop pretending, stop being strong. The wedding dress suddenly felt like it was strangling her. She fumbled with the buttons, her fingers clumsy with exhaustion and shock, until she finally tore the thing off and let it fall to the floor. It lay there like a ghost, beautiful and empty and full of lies. She should shower, should sleep, should do something productive with the last hours of the worst day of her life. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at the city below. All those lights, all those people living their normal lives, going to their normal jobs, making their normal choices. While she was here, 40 floors up, trapped in a gilded cage by a man who wanted revenge more than he wanted a wife. Her phone buzzed in the small clutch Mrs. Chen had given her. A text from her father. I love you, baby girl. I know you can't forgive me. I don't deserve it, but I love you. Lena stared at the words until they blurred. Then she deleted the message and turned off her phone. Love. What a useless word. What a pathetic excuse for the choices people made when they were scared and desperate and willing to trade anything, even their daughters, for one more day of breathing. Her father loved her. Victor wanted revenge. Robert had disappeared, and she was the thread connecting them all, the bait in a trap she'd never seen coming. A knock at her door made her jump. Mrs. Romano? Mrs. Chen's voice, crisp and professional even at 1 a.m. I've brought you something to help you sleep. Lena opened the door a crack. The older woman stood there with a silver tray holding a teacup and a small white pill. I don't need drugs, Lena said. It's mild, just valerian and chamomile in the tea, and the pill is simply melatonin. Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. You've had a difficult day. Rest will help. Will it? Lena laughed, bitter and broken. Will rest help me wake up and realize this was all a nightmare? No, but it will help you face tomorrow with a clear head. She held out the tray. You'll need your strength, Mrs. Romano. The hard part is just beginning. Lena took the tray. The tea was still steaming, fragrant with herbs and honey, the kind of thing her mother used to make when she was sick, back when her mother was still alive, back when life made sense. Mrs. Chen? She called as the woman turned to leave. Victor said his father was killed 20 years ago. How old was he when it happened? 25. Old enough to inherit, young enough to be destroyed by grief. Mrs. Chen paused. He wasn't always like this, you know, cold, controlled. There was a time when he laughed, when he let people close. The ambush took more than his father. It took the man he might have been. And now he wants to take everything from the man who destroyed him. Wouldn't you? Mrs. Chen asked softly. If someone murdered your father, stole your future, forced you to become something you never wanted to be, wouldn't you want revenge too? The door closed before Lena could answer. She drank the tea, took the pill, climbed into the enormous bed wearing a nightgown someone else had chosen for her. The sheets were soft, expensive, probably cost more than her monthly rent used to, but they felt like a burial shroud. Sleep came slowly, unwillingly, dragging her down into dreams of white roses and cold gray eyes and a man who'd bought her for revenge. And somewhere in the darkness, in that space between waking and sleeping, Lena made herself a promise. Victor Romano thought he'd trapped her, thought he'd bought himself a compliant wife who would sit quietly while he used her to destroy her family. He was wrong. She might be his wife legally, might be stuck in this marriage, this life, this impossible situation. But she wasn't helpless, wasn't broken, wasn't going to be a passive victim in someone else's revenge story. If Victor wanted to use her as bait, fine, she'd play that role. But she'd do it on her terms, with her eyes open. And when the moment came, when her uncle surfaced and the trap snapped shut, she'd make sure she was the one who survived it. Because Lena Romano now, God help her, had learned something important tonight. Dignity wasn't about avoiding the fight. It was about choosing which battles to lose so you could win the war. And this war was far from over. The morning arrived with cruel efficiency, sunlight pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows that had no curtains to soften its assault. Lena woke disoriented, reaching for familiar walls that weren't there, her hand finding only expensive emptiness. For 3 beautiful seconds, she forgot. Then memory crashed back. The wedding, the revelation, Victor's cold explanation of exactly what she'd become. Bait. A message. A living piece of revenge. She dragged herself out of bed and found her phone still off, still holding her father's deleted text in its digital grave. The temptation to throw it out the window was visceral, but impractical. She turned it on instead and immediately regretted it. 17 missed calls, 32 texts, all from numbers she didn't recognize, except 3 from her best friend Maya and 1 from her father. Maya's messages were frantic. Lena, where are you? Why didn't you tell me you were getting married? Call me, please, I'm worried. Her father's was simpler. Please talk to me. Lena deleted them all and stepped into the shower, letting water hot enough to hurt, wash away the feeling of hands that didn't belong to her, adjusting her veil, fastening her dress, positioning her like a doll for photographs that would circulate in circles she'd never wanted to enter. When she emerged 20 minutes later, Mrs. Chen was in her room laying out clothes on the bed. Lena clutched her towel tighter, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was in this place where even locked doors meant nothing. Good morning, Mrs. Romano. Mrs. Chen didn't look up from smoothing a silk blouse. Breakfast is ready when you are. Mr. Romano requested you join him at 8. Requested or ordered? Lena's voice came out sharper than intended. With Mr. Romano, there's rarely a difference. The older woman finally met her eyes. But for what it's worth, he was polite about it, said please and everything. How civilized of him. More than you'd think. Mrs. Chen moved toward the door, then paused. A word of advice, if you'll take it. Mr. Romano respects directness. If you have questions, ask them. If you disagree, say so. The worst thing you can do is pretend to be something you're not. And what am I supposed to be? The dutiful wife? You're supposed to be yourself. That's what he chose, whether he admits it or not. Mrs. Chen's expression softened into something almost sympathetic. The clothes are suggestions, not requirements. Wear what makes you feel strong. You're going to need it. She left Lena alone with a wardrobe full of designer labels and the uncomfortable realization that Mrs. Chen might be the closest thing she had to an ally in this place. The clothes fit perfectly. Of course they did. Someone had clearly done their homework. But Lena bypassed the silk blouse and tailored pants in favor of her own jeans and a sweater she'd packed herself. Small rebellion, maybe childish, but it made her feel less like a paper doll being dressed for someone else's pleasure. She found Victor in a dining room that could seat 12, sitting at the head of a table set for 2. He'd traded his tuxedo for a charcoal suit, his hair still damp from his own shower, reading something on his tablet with the focused intensity of a man who saw the whole world as business. He looked up when she entered, and his gaze traveled from her face to her casual clothes and back again. Something flickered in his expression, amusement, maybe, or approval. Hard to tell with a man who kept his emotions locked down tighter than a vault. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "I drugged myself unconscious, if that counts." Lena sat at the place set for her, refusing to wait for an invitation. "Your housekeeper has excellent taste in sedatives. Mrs. Chen takes care of everyone in this house." He set down his tablet and gestured to the spread of food, pastries, fruit, eggs prepared 3 different ways, coffee that smelled like heaven. "Help yourself, we have a busy day ahead." "Do we?" She poured coffee, black and strong. "Let me guess. You're parading me around to make sure everyone knows you've acquired a new possession." "Actually, I'm taking you shopping." At her look of surprise, he almost smiled. "You'll need appropriate clothes for the events we'll be attending. Mrs. Chen did her best with your wardrobe, but there are gaps." "Events," Lena repeated flatly. "You mean the public part of this charade?" "I mean the strategic appearances that will ensure your uncle hears about our marriage as quickly as possible." Victor served himself eggs with the precision of a man who did everything carefully. "There's a charity gala on Friday. The Castellano family will be there." The name hit her like cold water. "The family that paid your uncle for information that got my father killed?" "Yes." He ate calmly, like they were discussing the weather. "They need to see you, need to understand that David Hart's daughter is now under my protection, part of my family. It will send a message. To my uncle. And to them. That the past has consequences. That debts eventually come due." Victor's eyes met hers, and she saw something dangerous lurking beneath that controlled surface. "The Castellanos think they won 20 years ago. This is the beginning of teaching them otherwise." Lena set down her coffee cup carefully, aware that her hands were shaking. "You married me to start a war. I married you to finish one." He leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Tell me, what do you know about your Uncle Robert?" "Almost nothing. He left when I was 8. My father never talked about him." Because David was ashamed. Ashamed that his brother was a thief and a traitor, ashamed that he couldn't fix it. Victor pulled out his phone and scrolled through something, then turned it toward her. "This is the last known photograph of Robert Hart, taken 6 months before he disappeared." The man in the photo looked like an older version of her father. Same eyes, same smile, same easy charm that had probably helped him get away with stealing millions. He stood next to a woman Lena didn't recognize, both of them laughing at some long-ago joke. "Who's the woman?" "We don't know. She disappeared around the same time he did. Lover, accomplice, or both." Victor took back his phone. Robert was good at making people trust him, good at seeming harmless while he robbed them blind. Your father idolized him when they were younger. And now my father sold me to clean up his brother's mess. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. How noble. Your father had his own debts beyond Robert's sins. Gambling, bad investments, loans from people who don't accept bankruptcy as an answer. Victor's tone went colder. I could have killed him. Many in my position would have. Instead, I offered him a way out. By taking his daughter. By giving you a life of security and protection in exchange for helping me close a 20-year-old wound. He stood, and Lena hated how her body tensed automatically. I won't apologize for the choice, Lena, But I won't lie about it either. You're here because I need you. Nothing more, nothing less. And when you don't need me anymore? The question hung between them like smoke. Victor walked to the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city below. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost thoughtful. I haven't thought that far ahead. One crisis at a time. He turned back to her. Get ready. We leave in 30 minutes. Wear something comfortable. We'll be walking. I don't want new clothes. I don't particularly care what you want. The words should have been cruel, but his delivery was matter-of-fact, almost gentle. You're Mrs. Victor Romano now. That comes with expectations, standards. Like it or not, people will judge me based on how you present yourself. Then maybe you should have married someone who wanted the job. Maybe. He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. But I didn't. I married you, so either embrace it or endure it, but either way, you're getting a new wardrobe. He left her sitting there with cold coffee and the uncomfortable realization that he was right. She was Mrs. Romano now, and whether she liked it or not, that came with a role to play. The only question was how much of herself she'd have to sacrifice to play it. The answer, she suspected, was more than she was ready to give. They took the Mercedes again, the same silent driver navigating through Manhattan traffic with the ease of someone who'd done this route 1,000 times. Victor sat beside her, scrolling through emails on his phone, and Lena watched the city slide past her window. Her city. The place she'd lived for 6 years, suddenly feeling foreign and dangerous now that she was seeing it through a criminal's eyes. Where are we going? She asked when they'd been driving for 15 minutes. Fifth Avenue? There's a boutique that caters to a specific clientele. He didn't look up from his phone. Discreet, exclusive, and very good at what they do. Which is dressing mob wives? That got his attention. He turned to her, one eyebrow raised. Is that what you think you are? Isn't it? I prefer organized businessmen, but I suppose accuracy isn't your concern right now. He pocketed his phone and gave her his full focus, which was somehow more unnerving than being ignored. Tell me something. Last night when you said I do, were you planning your escape or your survival? The question was too perceptive, cut too close to thoughts she'd barely admitted to herself. Does it matter? It matters to me. Escape means you're still thinking like a victim. Survival means you're thinking like a player. His gaze held hers, intense and searching. Which one are you, Lena? She wanted to lie, to tell him she was already planning to run the first chance she got, but something in his expression told her he'd know, and worse, that he'd be disappointed. Which shouldn't matter, shouldn't affect her at all. Survival, she admitted. For now. Good. He smiled then, real warmth breaking through the ice for just a second. That's good, players I can work with. The boutique was exactly what she expected. Understated elegance, hiding obscene prices, saleswomen who looked like models, and a private room where champagne appeared without being requested. The owner, a rail-thin woman named Dominique, greeted Victor like an old friend and assessed Lena with the clinical eye of a surgeon. She has good bones, Dominique announced in an accent that might have been French, or might have been affectation. And the coloring, très belle. But the clothes, Victor, mon Dieu, what has she been wearing? I like my clothes, Lena protested. Of course you do, chérie. They are comfortable, practical, very American. Dominique smiled like she'd just insulted her. But you are Mrs. Romano now. You need armor, not comfort. She swept Lena into a dressing room before any further protest could be made, and for the next 2 hours, Lena was prodded, measured, dressed, and redressed in a parade of outfits that cost more than her previous monthly salary. Silk sheaths and tailored suits, cocktail dresses and evening gowns, casual wear that somehow looked formal, and formal wear that suggested lethal elegance. Victor sat in a leather chair drinking espresso and offering opinions with the detachment of a man selecting weapons. Too soft. Too obvious. Perfect. Take that in 3 colors. And through it all, Lena stood like a mannequin and tried not to think about how much of herself she was losing with each outfit that fit perfectly, each dress that made her look like someone else entirely. The green, Victor said when Dominique brought out an emerald silk gown with a neckline that plunged just shy of scandalous. That's the one for Friday. Lena looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress was stunning, made her skin glow and her eyes bright, turned her from a reluctant bride into something that belonged in Victor's dangerous world. "It's too much," she said quietly. "It's perfect." Victor stood and walked over, and suddenly he was behind her in the mirror, tall and dark in his expensive suit, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple admiring their reflection. Only Lena could feel the gentle warning in his grip. "This is the dress you'll wear when you meet the people who helped murder my father, when you stand beside me and smile and play the role of the devoted wife while I watch them realize what I've done. You need to look like you belong there, like you're mine." "I'm not yours," she whispered, aware that Dominique had discreetly left them alone. "Legally, you are. Practically you are." His hand slid down her arms, and she shivered at the contact. "But I meant what I said last night. I don't want your affection, Lena. I don't even want your compliance. Not really. What I want is for you to be strong enough to survive what's coming." "And what is coming?" "War." He met her eyes in the mirror. "When your uncle surfaces, and he will surface, the Castellanos will realize I've been planning this for 20 years. They'll come for both of us. For you specifically, because you're the weakness I've revealed, the crack in my armor." "Then why reveal it? Why not keep me hidden?" "Because hidden weapons are useless, and because—" He stopped, something flickering across his face too fast to read. "Because I'm tired of hiding, tired of waiting. 20 years is long enough to grieve." Lena turned to face him, the dress whispering against her skin. This close, she could see the exhaustion he hid so well, the weight of 2 decades spent building toward this moment. He wasn't that much older than her, but he seemed ancient, worn down by choices and consequences, and a grief that had calcified into something harder than diamond. "You could let it go," she said softly. "Walk away. Build something new instead of destroying something old." "Could you? If someone killed your father, could you just let it go?" The question hit harder than he probably intended. Her mother had died of cancer when Lena was 15. Slow, painful, inevitable. But it wasn't murder. Wasn't someone's choice to destroy her family, and she still woke up some mornings angry at the universe for taking her mother too soon. "I don't know," she admitted. "Honest answer." He stepped back, breaking the strange intimacy of the moment. "We'll take everything. Have it delivered to the penthouse by Thursday." Dominique reappeared as if summoned, all business and French charm, and Lena escaped back to the dressing room to change into her own clothes. When she emerged, Victor was on his phone again, speaking rapid Italian to someone who was clearly arguing with him. He switched to English mid-sentence without missing a beat. "I don't care what Santoro wants. Tell him the deal stands as negotiated, or it doesn't stand at all." A pause. "No. No renegotiation. He agreed to the terms, he honors them, or I find someone who will." Another pause, longer. "Then he can try. We both know how that ends." He hung up and pocketed his phone, then noticed Lena watching. "Business, nothing that concerns you." "Everything about your business concerns me now. I'm the bait, remember?" "Fair point." He held the door for her, and they stepped back into the Manhattan afternoon. "Santoro runs shipping on the west side. He's trying to renegotiate a contract we made 6 months ago because fuel costs have gone up. It's a test. He wants to see if marriage has made me soft." "Has it?" Victor's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Marriage to you? No, Lena. If anything, it's made me more dangerous, because now I have something to protect beyond myself." They walked for a while in silence, and Lena realized this was the first time she'd been outside since the wedding. The city felt different now, sharper, more threatening, full of eyes she couldn't see but could definitely feel watching. Twice, Victor nodded to men who appeared casual, but clearly weren't, and she understood she was surrounded by protection she hadn't asked for and couldn't refuse. "How many people work for you?" she asked. "Directly? About 50. Indirectly, a few hundred." He guided her across the street with a hand on her lower back, casual and proprietary. "They handle everything from legitimate businesses to less legitimate ones. I try to keep the two separate, but there's always overlap." Legitimate like what? Real estate, restaurants, import/export. My father believed in diversification. They stopped in front of a cafe, small and tucked between larger buildings. Are you hungry? This place makes excellent sandwiches. It was such a normal question, such an everyday suggestion, that Lena almost laughed. Here was a man who'd bought her like property, who was using her to bait a trap that might get her killed, asking if she wanted lunch like they were on a date. Sure, she said, because what else was there to say? The cafe was quiet, mostly empty at this hour. Victor ordered for both of them in Italian, and the owner, an older man with kind eyes, responded in the same language before disappearing into the kitchen. They sat at a corner table, and for a few minutes they could have been any couple taking a break from shopping. You speak Italian, Lena observed. My grandmother refused to speak English at home, said it ruined the flavor of words. He smiled at the memory, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. She lived with us until I was 12, taught me to cook, to swear properly, to understand that family was everything. What happened to her? Heart attack? Quick, painless, the way she would have wanted. The smile faded. My father never recovered. She was the one who kept him grounded, reminded him he was human. After she died, he threw himself into the business completely. And then your uncle betrayed him. And then your uncle betrayed him, Victor echoed. 3 years later. Took the money, sold the information, disappeared like smoke. His hands curled into fists on the table. My father became obsessed with finding him. Spent more money hunting Robert than Robert had stolen. It consumed him, made him reckless. Which is why he walked into that ambush without proper precautions. The owner returned with sandwiches that smelled incredible. Prosciutto and mozzarella with roasted peppers and some kind of aioli that made Lena's mouth water. She ate because her body needed fuel, but tasted nothing. You blame my uncle for your father's death, she said between bites. But it sounds like your father's obsession killed him as much as the ambush. Victor's eyes went cold. Careful. I'm just saying, revenge has a cost. Sometimes the cost is everything. She met his gaze without flinching. What happens if you destroy my uncle but lose yourself in the process? Then I lose myself. But at least my father's death will be answered. He took a bite of his sandwich, chewed, swallowed. You don't understand what it's like to carry that weight. To know that someone murdered your father and walked away free. To spend 20 years building power just so you'd be strong enough to make them pay. You're right. I don't understand. Lena leaned forward. But I understand that using me to do it makes you no better than my uncle. He sold your father's life for money. You're using mine for revenge. Different currency, same transaction. The silence that followed was dangerous. Victor set down his sandwich very carefully, and Lena watched his jaw work as he controlled whatever impulse was fighting to break through that iron composure. You have a sharp tongue, Mrs. Romano. That's going to get you in trouble. I'm already in trouble. Might as well be honest about it. Honest. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want honesty? Fine. You're right. Using you is no better than what Robert did. It's cold and calculated and morally questionable at best, but I don't care. I stopped caring about being good when my father died in my arms, and the last thing he asked me to do was make it right. So yes, I'm using you. And I'll keep using you until this is done, and your opinion of me doesn't change that one bit. Then why tell me? Lena pushed. Why explain any of this? Why not just keep me in the dark and move me around like a chess piece? Because I'm not a complete monster, despite what you think. He stood abruptly, throwing cash on the table. And because you deserve to know what you're walking into, even if you can't walk away from it. They left the cafe and walked back to where the Mercedes was waiting. The drive home was silent, tense, and Lena spent it staring out the window, wondering what kind of man bought a wife for revenge but felt guilty enough about it to explain himself. A complicated one, she decided. Dangerous, damaged, and far more human than he wanted to admit. Back at the penthouse, Mrs. Chen informed them that Lena's new wardrobe would arrive the next day and that dinner would be ready at 7. Victor disappeared into his office without another word, leaving Lena alone with her thoughts and the growing realization that she'd poked a bear and somehow survived it. She spent the afternoon exploring the penthouse more thoroughly. 6 bedrooms, all beautifully decorated and completely impersonal. A library with floor-to-ceiling books in multiple languages. A gym that looked professional enough to train athletes. And everywhere, that same cold perfection, beautiful, expensive, and utterly devoid of warmth. The only room with any personality was Victor's office. She found it by accident, door slightly ajar, and couldn't resist peeking inside. Dark wood furniture, leather chairs, walls lined with photographs that told a story she hadn't expected. A young Victor with an older man who had to be his father, both of them laughing at some family gathering. The same man, older, grayer, standing beside a tiny woman who could only be the grandmother he'd mentioned. More photos of people Lena didn't recognize, presumably the organization, the family, the empire Victor had inherited. And on his desk, in a simple silver frame, a photo of that same older man lying in what looked like a hospital bed, his face pale and drawn, holding Victor's hand. The last photograph, maybe. The last moment before everything changed. He lasted 3 days after the ambush. Victor's voice came from behind her, and Lena jumped guiltily. Long enough to make me promise I'd finish what he started. Long enough to tell me he was proud of the man I'd become. Long enough to die knowing his son would make it right. "I'm sorry," Lena said quietly. "I shouldn't have." "It's fine. You live here now. Nothing's off limits." He walked past her and picked up the photo, studying it with an expression she couldn't read. His name was Alessandro. He was a hard man, but fair. Never asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. And he loved my grandmother more than life. "Is that why you'll never love anyone? Because you saw what losing her did to him?" Victor set down the photo and looked at her with something like surprise. "Perceptive. Obvious, actually. You're terrified of caring about anything you can't control." She moved closer, drawn by curiosity and something else she didn't want to name. "That's why you don't want affection from me. Not because it would complicate things, but because it would make you vulnerable. And yet here you are, analyzing me like I'm some kind of puzzle to solve." He leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "What do you want, Lena? Absolution? Understanding? Permission to hate me? I want to know if there's anything human left under all that ice." The words came out before she could stop them, raw and honest. "Because if you're just a revenge machine, fine. I know where I stand. But if there's a person in there somewhere, I need to know that too." He stared at her for a long moment, and she watched something shift in his eyes, some internal calculation being made, some decision being reached. Then he moved, closing the distance between them in 2 strides, and suddenly he was close enough that she could feel the heat coming off his body. "You want to know if I'm human?" His voice dropped low, intimate. "I'm human enough to know that what I'm doing to you is wrong. Human enough to hate myself for it, but not human enough to stop." His hand came up and cupped her cheek, the gesture almost tender. "Does that answer your question?" Lena's breath caught. This close, she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, the slight shadow of stubble on his jaw, the pulse beating in his throat. He smelled like expensive cologne and something darker, dangerous. "Yes," she whispered. "Good." He dropped his hand and stepped back, and the loss of contact felt like cold water. "Dinner's in 20 minutes. Try not to psychoanalyze me over the pasta." He left her standing there in his office, surrounded by photographs of the dead and the ghosts they'd left behind, wondering what the hell had just happened and why her heart was racing like she'd run a marathon. Dinner was surprisingly civil. They ate Mrs. Chen's incredible pasta and talked about neutral things, books, movies, the relative merits of different neighborhoods in Manhattan. Victor was well read and surprisingly funny when he let his guard down, and Lena found herself actually enjoying the conversation despite everything. It was dangerous, she realized, this humanization of her captor. Much easier to hate a monster than a man who quoted Dostoevsky and admitted he was wrong but did it anyway. After dinner, Victor excused himself for a phone call, and Lena retreated to her room. She tried to read, tried to sleep, but her mind kept circling back to that moment in his office, the heat of his hand on her face, the way he'd looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. A knock at her door pulled her from thoughts she shouldn't be having. She opened it to find Victor standing there, still dressed, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, looking more human than she'd seen him. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "For which part?" For earlier, in my office. He ran a hand through his hair, messing the careful style. That was inappropriate. You were asking a fair question, and I made it something else. Something else, Lena repeated. That's one way to put it. I'm trying to maintain boundaries here, for both our sakes. He leaned against the door frame, and she noticed how tired he looked. This situation is complicated enough without adding attraction to the mix. Is that what that was? Attraction? Wasn't it? His smile was wry and self-deprecating. You're beautiful, intelligent, stronger than you have any right to be given what I've put you through. And I'm a man who hasn't let himself want anything beyond revenge for 20 years. So yes, there's attraction, which is why I'm apologizing and drawing a line right now, before this gets messier than it already is. Lena should have been relieved, should have appreciated his honesty and his boundaries. Instead, she felt something dangerous stir in her chest. Curiosity, maybe, or the perverse desire to push until something broke. What if I don't want lines? She heard herself say. Victor's eyes went dark. Then you're playing a game you don't understand. Maybe I'm tired of everyone telling me what I understand. She stepped closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. You married me, brought me into your world, made me part of your revenge. Don't I get to decide what happens between us? No. The word was hard, final. Because you're here against your will, which means anything between us would be coerced. And I'm a lot of things, Lena, but I'm not that. The word should have hurt. Instead, they made her see him clearly for the first time, not as a monster or a victim, but as a man trying desperately to maintain some kind of moral code in a world that had no use for morality. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For having lines. For being human enough to draw them. She smiled, sad and genuine. Go to bed, Victor. Your revenge can wait until tomorrow. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded and turned to leave. But at the door he paused and looked back. For what it's worth, he said quietly, if things were different, if we'd met under any other circumstances, I think I would have liked knowing you. Then he was gone, leaving Lena alone with a truth she wasn't ready to examine, that she might have liked knowing him too. The next 3 days passed in a strange rhythm of forced domesticity and careful distance. Victor left early each morning for meetings Lena wasn't invited to, returning late with tension carved into his shoulders and exhaustion shadowing his eyes. They shared meals when his schedule allowed, conversations that touched on everything except the truth hanging between them, that Friday was coming, that the gala would be their public debut, that somewhere out there her uncle was hopefully taking the bait. Lena spent her time exploring the boundaries of her new prison. The penthouse was vast enough that she could avoid Victor when she wanted to, intimate enough that she always knew when he was home. She read books from his library, discovering his taste ran to history and philosophy, the margins filled with notes in his precise handwriting. She worked out in the gym, pushing her body until sweat replaced thinking. And she stood at those floor-to-ceiling windows for hours, watching the city move below and wondering if anyone down there knew what it felt like to be owned. On Thursday afternoon, Dominique's boutique delivered 17 boxes of clothes that transformed Lena's closet from sparse to excessive. Mrs. Chen helped her unpack, handling each garment with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. This one for the gala, she said, lifting the emerald dress from its tissue paper cocoon. Mr. Romano has excellent taste when he chooses to use it. He certainly knows how to dress his possessions, Lena muttered, then regretted it when she saw Mrs. Chen's expression tighten. Is that what you think you are? A possession? Aren't I? He bought me from my father like I was furniture. Mrs. Chen hung the dress carefully before turning to face her. Mr. Romano has owned many things in his life. Buildings, businesses, enough money to buy whatever catches his eye. But he's never owned a person before. I think it troubles him more than he expected. Good. It should trouble him. What troubles me, Mrs. Chen continued, ignoring her sarcasm, is that you're wasting energy hating your situation instead of using it. Lena looked up sharply. Using it how? You have access most people would kill for. Victor Romano's ear, his protection, his home. Yes, you were forced into this marriage, and yes, that's unforgivable. But you're here now. The question isn't whether it's fair, it's what you're going to do with it. I'm bait for a trap. What exactly am I supposed to do? Mrs. Chen smiled, and it was the expression of a woman who'd survived her own share of impossible situations. Be more than bait. Be the person who changes how the trap closes. She moved to the door, then paused. Mr. Romano has been planning revenge for 20 years. That's a long time to carry hate. Long enough that maybe he's forgotten there are other options. Like what? That's for you to figure out. I'm just the housekeeper. She left with that cryptic comment hanging in the air, and Lena stared at the emerald dress, wondering what the hell Mrs. Chen thought she could possibly do to change a vendetta 2 decades in the making. That evening, Victor came home earlier than usual carrying a velvet box that made Lena's stomach drop. Jewelry? She guessed as he set it on the table between them. Insurance. He opened the box to reveal a necklace that probably cost more than a house. Diamonds and emeralds arranged in an intricate pattern that caught the light and threw it back like captured stars. You'll wear this tomorrow night. It belonged to my grandmother. Lena reached out, then pulled her hand back. I can't wear that. If something happened to it, nothing will happen to it. You'll be with me the entire evening. He lifted the necklace, and it cascaded over his fingers like liquid wealth. My grandmother wore this to every important event. She said it reminded her that beauty could be armor if you wore it right. Your grandmother sounds like she was terrifying. She was, in the best possible way. Victor's smile was soft with memory. She would have liked you, I think. You have her spine. I doubt she would have approved of how I became part of your family. Probably not. She had very specific opinions about treating women with respect. He set the necklace back in its box. But she also believed that what matters isn't how something starts, but how it ends. That people deserve chances to become better than their worst choices. Is that what you're hoping for? A chance to be better? I'm hoping to survive long enough to find out. He closed the box and pushed it toward her. Keep this in your room. Tomorrow Mrs. Chen will help you get ready. We leave at 7. Victor? She stopped him before he could retreat. What happens at this gala? Really? He turned back and she saw the weight settling over him again, the man becoming the weapon. The Castellanos will be there. Specifically, Marco Castellano, who runs their family now. His father was the one who paid Robert for information, who planned the ambush, who gave the order that killed my father. Marco inherited that legacy along with everything else. And you're going to kill him? Not tomorrow. Tomorrow is just a message. Look what I have. Look what you didn't see coming. Look how patient I've been. His jaw tightened. Robert will hear about it. Probably already has. The question is whether he'll make contact with you or try something else. You think he'll reach out to me? I think he'll panic. You're his niece, his blood, now married to the son of the man he helped murder. He'll want to know if you're safe, if you know what you've walked into. Victor moved closer, and Lena found herself pinned by the intensity of his gaze. When he does, I need you to tell me immediately. Not because I own you, but because your life depends on it. The Castellanos will use you to get to him if they figure out what you are. And what am I, exactly? The key to everything. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly gentle. Which makes you the most dangerous thing in my life right now. The moment stretched between them, loaded with things neither of them could say. Then Victor's phone rang, shattering whatever spell had been weaving itself around them. He answered it, switching immediately to Italian, his tone going cold and hard as he dealt with whatever crisis had erupted. Lena took the velvet box and retreated to her room, her heart pounding for reasons she didn't want to examine. She opened the box again and lifted the necklace, feeling the weight of it, the history. Victor's grandmother had worn this, had used beauty as armor, had believed people deserved chances to be better. Standing at her mirror, Lena fastened the necklace around her throat and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked powerful, untouchable, like someone who belonged in Victor Romano's dangerous world. The problem was, a small part of her was starting to wonder if maybe she did. Friday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Lena woke to find Mrs. Chen already in her room, laying out everything she'd need with military precision. The emerald dress, the necklace, shoes that were more art than footwear, and a clutch so small it could barely hold her phone and lipstick. No escape kit today, Mrs. Chen said dryly, noticing Lena's look at the tiny purse. You won't need it. Mr. Romano will have at least 6 security personnel within 20 feet of you at all times. How comforting. It should be. Marco Castellano is many things, but he's not stupid. He'll know what tonight means, and he won't make a move at the gala itself. Too public, too many witnesses. Mrs. Chen started running a bath, adding oils that smelled like jasmine and something darker. But after, in the car, at home, anywhere less controlled, that's when it gets dangerous. Lena sank into the bath when it was ready, letting heat unknot muscles she hadn't realized were tense. Through the open door, she could hear Mrs. Chen moving around, preparing things with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. How long have you worked for Victor? Lena called out. 15 years, since just after his father died. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway. He was a mess back then, 25 years old, suddenly responsible for an empire he barely understood, drowning in grief and rage. I was working for a family friend who thought Victor needed someone to keep him from destroying himself. And did you keep him from destroying himself? I kept him fed and clothed and made sure he slept occasionally. The rest he had to figure out on his own. She smiled sadly. He's a good man buried under a lot of bad choices. I keep hoping he'll dig himself out before it's too late. You care about him. Like the son I never had, which is why I'm telling you this. Mrs. Chen's expression turned serious. Tonight will change things. Once the Castellanos see you, once Robert knows you're involved, there's no going back. Victor will become the target he's been building himself into for 20 years, and you'll be caught in the crossfire. Then why tell me to use my position, if it's so dangerous? Because danger doesn't mean helplessness. You're in this whether you like it or not, but how you handle it is still your choice. She laid out a robe. Finish your bath. We have work to do. The next 4 hours were a masterclass in transformation. Mrs. Chen worked on Lena's hair, pulling it into an elegant updo that left her neck bare for the necklace. A makeup artist Victor had hired appeared and turned her face into something luminous and untouchable. And when Lena finally stepped into the emerald dress, zipping it up and fastening the necklace, she barely recognized herself. The woman in the mirror looked powerful, dangerous, like someone who could stand beside Victor Romano and not be crushed by his shadow. Perfect, Mrs. Chen breathed. You look like you were born for this. I wasn't. That's the problem. None of us were born for the lives we end up living. We just learn to wear them better. Mrs. Chen handed her the tiny clutch. Mr. Romano is waiting in the living room. Go show him what he's walking in with. Lena took a breath, steadying herself, then walked out of her room and down the hallway on heels that forced her spine straight and her chin up. The living room was empty when she entered, but she heard Victor's voice from his office, still on the phone, still conducting business right up until the last second. She waited, studying her reflection in the dark windows. The city glittered below, oblivious to the small dramas playing out in penthouses and back alleys. Somewhere out there, her uncle was hiding. Her father was probably drinking himself numb with guilt, and she was standing here in a dress that cost more than most people made in a month, preparing to be paraded in front of the people who'd murdered Victor's father. I need to call you back. Victor's voice came from behind her, rough and startled. Lena turned and watched his expression shift from professional to something she couldn't quite read. He'd changed into a tuxedo that made him look even more dangerous than usual, all dark elegance and controlled power. But it was the way he was looking at her that made her breath catch, like he was seeing her for the first time. Is it too much? She asked when the silence stretched too long. It's perfect. He moved closer, circling her slowly, taking in every detail. My grandmother would say you wear her necklace better than she did. Your grandmother would say you're a liar. Probably. He stopped in front of her, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. Heat, appreciation, and something darker that made her skin prickle. But she'd also say you look like you could bring empires to their knees, and she'd be right about that. I don't want empires. I just want to survive tonight. You'll do more than survive. He offered his arm. Ready? No, but I don't think that matters. It doesn't, he agreed and led her to the elevator. The gala was being held at the plaza because apparently Manhattan's elite believed in tradition even when celebrating questionable charities. The ballroom was transformed into something from a fairy tale. Ice sculptures, crystal chandeliers, thousands of white roses that probably cost more than Lena's college education. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns that could fund small countries milled around making conversation that looked pleasant and probably wasn't. Victor kept his hand on Lena's lower back as they entered, possessive and protective in equal measure. She felt eyes turn toward them, conversations pause, the weight of attention settling over them like snow. "Smile," Victor murmured. "You're the most beautiful woman here and you're mine. Let them wonder how I got so lucky." "You bought me. There's no luck involved." "They don't know that." His fingers pressed against her spine, a gentle warning. "Play the part, Lena. Just for tonight." So she smiled, laughed at the right moments. Let Victor introduce her to people whose names she immediately forgot and whose eyes assessed her like merchandise. She drank champagne she couldn't taste and made small talk about charities she didn't care about. And through it all, she felt Victor's presence like a shield, his hand never leaving her back, his attention tracking every person who came too close. "That's impressive." The voice came from behind them, smooth and amused. Victor's entire body went rigid, and Lena felt the temperature drop despite the crowded room. "Marco," Victor said, turning them both to face a man in his 40s with silver threading through dark hair and eyes like a snake. "I was wondering when you'd make an appearance. And miss the opportunity to meet your new bride? Never." Marco Castellano's smile didn't reach his eyes as he extended his hand to Lena. "Mrs. Romano, you're even more beautiful than the rumors suggested." Lena took his hand because refusing would have been too obvious, but his grip lingered just long enough to make her uncomfortable. "Thank you. Though I'm surprised rumors about me spread so quickly. News of Victor Romano getting married tends to travel fast, especially when—" Marco's eyes flicked to Victor, sharp with meaning. "When the bride has such interesting family connections." There it was, the acknowledgement that he knew exactly who she was and what it meant. Victor's hand tightened on her back, the only sign of his reaction. "Family is everything," Victor said, his voice dangerously soft. "I'm sure you understand that, given how you inherited yours." "I do. Though some legacies are easier to inherit than others." Marco's attention shifted back to Lena. "Tell me, Mrs. Romano, how are you adjusting to married life? It must be quite a change from your previous circumstances." "Every marriage is an adjustment," Lena managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "But Victor has been very generous." "I'm sure he has. He learned from the best. His father was also known for his generosity." The words were pleasant, but the subtext was poison. Though Alessandro's generosity sometimes made him vulnerable to those who would take advantage. Victor's laugh was cold enough to freeze. "My father's only vulnerability was trusting the wrong people, a mistake I don't intend to repeat." "No, I imagine you don't." Marco's smile sharpened. "Well, I won't monopolize your evening. I'm sure you have many people to greet, though perhaps we could arrange dinner sometime. I'd love to get to know your lovely wife better." "We'll see," Victor said, which clearly meant never. "Enjoy your evening, Marco." They moved away, Victor's hand now gripping her waist hard enough to bruise. Lena could feel rage radiating off him in waves, barely contained beneath that controlled surface. "Breathe," she whispered. "Everyone's watching. He threatened you. Right to my face, he threatened you. He was testing you, and you passed." She turned them toward the bar, giving him a moment to collect himself. "What now?" "Now we make it through the rest of this nightmare without me killing him in front of 300 witnesses." Victor grabbed champagne from a passing waiter and downed it like water. "And then we go home and wait for your uncle to make contact. You think tonight will trigger that?" "I think Marco just told Robert exactly what he needs to know, that you're involved, that I'm using you, and that you're vulnerable." His eyes scanned the room, tracking threats she couldn't see. "Your uncle will panic, make a mistake, and when he does, I'll be ready." They stayed another 2 hours, playing their parts perfectly, dancing when expected, mingling when required, presenting the image of a couple deeply in love to a room full of people who knew better. And through it all, Lena felt the trap tightening around her. threads she couldn't see drawing closer with every conversation, every smile, every moment that Marco Castellanos' snake eyes followed their movement across the ballroom. Finally, mercifully, Victor leaned down and whispered, "We're leaving. I can't stand another minute of this." The Mercedes was waiting, and Lena sank into the back seat with relief that made her dizzy. Victor climbed in beside her, and the privacy screen went up, giving them blessed solitude as the driver pulled into Manhattan traffic. "You did well," Victor said quietly. "Better than I expected." "You expected me to fall apart?" "I expected you to tell Marco exactly what you thought of him and this whole situation. The fact that you didn't shows remarkable restraint." He loosened his bow tie, and she watched his shoulders slowly unclench. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We don't know if it worked." "It worked." "Did you see his face when he realized who you were? He knows what I've done. Knows I've been planning this for 20 years. And now he has to figure out how to respond without starting a war he's not ready for." "And my uncle?" "We'll make contact within 48 hours. I'd bet everything I own on it." Victor turned to look at her, and in the dim light of the car, he looked exhausted and young and very human. "When he does, I need you to remember something." "What?" "That Robert isn't the man you remember from childhood. He's not your family, not really. He's a thief and a traitor who destroyed my family and abandoned his own. Whatever he says, whatever promises he makes, don't trust him." "I barely remember him. Why would I trust him?" "Because he's good at making people trust him. It's how he got close enough to my father to betray him." Victor's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers threading through hers. "Promise me you'll be careful, that you won't take any chances." The contact sent electricity up her arm, and Lena found herself squeezing back. "I promise. Though I'm still not sure why you care what happens to me beyond losing your bait." "You're not just bait anymore." The words came out rough, honest. "I don't know what you are exactly, but you're not just a tool. Not anymore." The car pulled up to their building before Lena could respond, and the moment shattered as the driver opened their door. Victor helped her out, his hand staying on her back as they rode the elevator up in silence, charged with things neither of them could say. Inside the penthouse, Lena headed straight for her room, desperate to get out of the dress and the heels and the role she'd been playing all night. But Victor's voice stopped her. "Lena." She turned, and he was standing there in the dim light with his bow tie undone and his jacket gone and an expression on his face that made her heart stutter. "Thank you," he said again. "For tonight, for being stronger than you had any reason to be, for not hating me quite as much as I deserve. Don't mistake survival for forgiveness," she said softly. "I'm not, but I'll take survival if it's all you can give." He moved closer, and she should have stepped back but couldn't make herself. "I meant what I said in the car. You're not just bait anymore." "Then what am I?" He reached up and touched the necklace at her throat, his fingers brushing her skin. "I don't know yet, but I'm starting to think it's something that scares me more than revenge." The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Lena could feel her pulse pounding where his fingers rested against her neck, could see her own confusion reflected in his eyes. "Victor." Her phone rang, the sound shrill and jarring in the quiet penthouse. They both froze, and Victor's expression shifted from vulnerable to alert in a heartbeat. "Answer it," he said, stepping back. "Put it on speaker." Lena pulled her phone from the tiny clutch with shaking hands. "Unknown number." She showed Victor, who nodded tensely, then hit accept and speaker. "Hello?" Silence. Then a voice she barely recognized but somehow knew, rough with emotion and years of hiding. "Lena? Baby girl, is that you?" Her Uncle Robert. After 20 years of silence, he'd finally surfaced, and the trap Victor had spent 2 decades building was about to snap shut. "Uncle Robert," she breathed, watching Victor's face go cold and hard as stone. "Where are you?" "Somewhere safe. Listen, I don't have much time. I heard about your marriage, and He paused, and she heard fear in the silence. "You need to get away from him, Lena. Victor Romano is dangerous. He's using you to get to me." "I know." The words came out before she could stop them. He told me everything about the money, the betrayal, his father. He told you. Robert's laugh was bitter. Of course he did. He wants you to hate me, wants you to think I'm the monster so you'll help him. But it's not that simple, sweetheart. Nothing about that night was simple. Victor's hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to hurt. His eyes blazed with warning, but Lena couldn't look away from the phone. Then explain it to me, she said. Make me understand why you disappeared for 20 years. Because they would have killed me. The Castellanos, Victor's father, all of them. I stumbled onto something I shouldn't have seen, and when I tried to expose it, they came for me. I took the money because I needed to run, and I gave information because I thought... His voice cracked. I thought I was doing the right thing, but Alessandro died, and it became my fault, and I've been running ever since. You're lying, Victor's voice cut through, hard and certain. My father was an honorable man. Whatever you think you saw... Victor, you're there? Robert's laugh turned desperate. Of course you are. It's you. Still controlling her, still using her. Just like your father used people, used me, used everyone who got close enough to see what he really was. Careful, Victor said, his voice dropping to something lethal. You're talking about a man worth 10 of you. Am I? Ask yourself, Victor, why would I betray someone who treated me well? Why would I risk everything unless I had no choice? Robert's breathing was ragged. Lena, please, meet me. Let me explain in person. You deserve to know the truth before you're completely lost to his revenge. Lena looked at Victor and saw 20 years of certainty cracking, doubt bleeding through the edges. His grip on her wrist loosened, and something like pain flashed across his face. Where? Lena asked, her own voice shaking. No, Victor said flatly. Absolutely not. The old carousel in Central Park, tomorrow at noon. Come alone, Lena. If he's with you, I disappear, and you'll never hear from me again. Robert paused. I know you don't remember me well, but I'm still your blood, still family. That has to mean something. The line went dead. Lena and Victor stared at each other in the sudden silence, the weight of 20 years of assumptions and accusations hanging between them like smoke. He's lying, Victor said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. Everything he said, it's manipulation, trying to make you doubt so you'll help him escape. Maybe, or maybe there's more to this than you've let yourself believe. Lena pulled her wrist free from his grip. 20 years, Victor. You've spent 20 years building this revenge based on what you think happened. What if you're wrong? I'm not wrong. My father died because of him. Your father died in an ambush, but why was he there? Why was he vulnerable enough for it to work? She saw him flinch and pressed harder. You said yourself he became obsessed with finding Robert. What if that obsession was about more than stolen money? Don't do this, Victor said, and for the first time since she'd met him, he sounded desperate. Don't make me question everything when I'm this close to ending it. I'm not making you do anything. I'm just asking you to consider that maybe, possibly, there's a truth you haven't wanted to see. Lena reached up and unclasped the necklace, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. I'm going tomorrow to meet him, and you can't stop me. The hell I can't. You're my wife. I'm your prisoner, she corrected, setting the necklace on the table between them. You've said it yourself a dozen different ways. But this choice is mine. My uncle, my family, my decision. Victor stared at her, and she watched the war play out across his face. Control versus care, revenge versus doubt, the man he'd become versus the man he might have been. If you go, he said finally, you go with protection. My people, watching from a distance, non-negotiable. Fine. And you wear a wire, so I can hear everything he says. Also fine. And if he tries anything, if I even suspect you're in danger, I'm pulling you out whether you like it or not. Understood. Lena moved toward her room, then stopped and looked back at him, standing there in his tuxedo with his certainty crumbling around him. Victor, what if he's telling the truth? What if your father wasn't the man you think he was? What would that do to your revenge? He didn't answer, just stood there looking lost and young and more human than she'd ever seen him, while everything he'd built his life around threatened to collapse. And Lena realized with startling clarity that she didn't want him to break. That somewhere in the past week, despite everything, She'd started to care what happened to the man who'd bought her for revenge, but was learning she might be worth more than that. Which was its own kind of trap, more dangerous than anything her uncle could set. She left him standing there and closed her door, leaning against it while her heart pounded and her mind raced. Tomorrow she'd meet the man who'd started all of this, the ghost who'd haunted Victor for 20 years. And depending on what he said, depending on what truth finally surfaced after 2 decades of hiding, everything might change. The only question was whether either of them would survive it. Sleep never came. Lena lay in the enormous bed watching shadows move across the ceiling, her mind replaying the phone call until every word was etched into memory. Robert's voice, desperate, afraid, insistent that there was more to the story than Victor's version allowed, and Victor's face when doubt crept in, when 20 years of certainty began to fracture like glass under pressure. She heard him pacing in his office around 3 in the morning, footsteps steady and relentless. Part of her wanted to go to him, to ask what he was thinking, but the larger part knew he needed to wrestle with his demons alone. This was his grief, his revenge, his reckoning. She was just the catalyst forcing him to face it. Dawn broke gray and cold, the kind of November morning that promised nothing good. Lena showered and dressed in jeans and a sweater, practical clothes for whatever was coming. When she emerged, she found Victor in the kitchen drinking coffee that had to be hours old, still wearing his tuxedo pants and wrinkled dress shirt, looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. "You didn't sleep," she observed, pouring her own coffee. "Neither did you. I heard you moving around." He set down his cup with deliberate care, like he was afraid any sudden movement might shatter something. "I've been going through my father's papers, everything from that last year before he died. And nothing makes sense anymore." He laughed, hollow and broken. 20 years I've been so certain, so sure I knew exactly what happened, who was responsible, what justice looked like. Now I'm reading his notes and seeing gaps I never noticed before. Questions he never answered, meetings with people he never explained. Lena sat across from him, cradling warmth between her palms. "What kind of meetings?" "The Castellanos, for one. 3 times in the 2 months before he died, he met with Marco's father privately. No guards, no witnesses, nothing on record." Victor ran his hands through his hair, destroying what was left of its style. Why would he meet privately with someone he was supposed to be at war with? Maybe they were negotiating peace. Or maybe... He stopped, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. "Or maybe your uncle was telling the truth about stumbling onto something," Lena finished quietly. "About your father being involved in things that weren't what they seemed." "My father was a good man." But the words came out defensive, uncertain. He provided for his family, protected his people, built something legitimate out of the chaos his own father left him. People can be both things, Victor. Good fathers and flawed men, protective and dangerous. It doesn't have to be either or. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the boy he must have been underneath the armor, someone who'd lost his father violently and built an entire identity around making that loss mean something. Take away the certainty of his father's innocence, and what was left? "I don't know how to let this go," he admitted. "Revenge is all I've had for so long. Without it, I'm just human," Lena supplied. "Grief-stricken and tired and ready to move on. That's not nothing, Victor. That's actually everything." Mrs. Chen appeared before he could respond, moving through the kitchen with her usual efficiency. She took one look at Victor's face and made a small sound of sympathy. "You look terrible. When's the last time you ate something other than coffee?" She didn't wait for an answer, just started pulling things from the refrigerator. "Both of you sit. I'll make breakfast, and you'll eat it, and then we'll figure out how to keep Mrs. Romano alive during this monumentally stupid meeting." "It's not stupid," Lena started. "It's incredibly stupid," Mrs. Chen interrupted, cracking eggs with more force than necessary. "Meeting a fugitive who's been hiding for 20 years in a public place where anyone could be watching? Brilliant plan. What could possibly go wrong?" "That's why we're taking precautions," Victor said, some of his usual control returning. "I've got 8 people positioned around the carousel. Lena will wear a wire. At the first sign of trouble, we pull her out. And if the trouble is what your uncle tells her, if it's information that changes everything?" Mrs. Chen met his eyes steadily. "Are you prepared for that possibility?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush. Victor stood abruptly and walked to the windows, staring out at the city like it held answers he couldn't find. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I'm about to find out." They spent the next 2 hours preparing. A technician Victor trusted came to the penthouse and fitted Lena with a wire so small and sophisticated she couldn't even feel it. Victor tested it obsessively, making her walk to different rooms while he listened through an earpiece, adjusting levels until he could hear her breathing. "This is invasive," Lena protested when he made her repeat a phrase for the 5th time. "This is insurance. If Robert tries anything, if anyone else shows up, I need to know immediately." He moved closer, his hands coming up to check the wire's placement one more time, fingers brushing her collarbone with clinical precision that still made her shiver. "Promise me you'll be careful, that you won't take any risks." "I promise. Though I'm still not sure what you think he's going to do." He sounded scared, Victor, not dangerous. Scared people are the most dangerous kind. They make desperate choices. His hands lingered on her shoulders, and she could feel the tension radiating through him. "I can't lose you. Not when I'm this close to answers, and definitely not when I'm starting to realize you might matter more than the revenge." The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Lena reached up and covered his hands with hers, feeling the calluses on his palms, the slight tremor he was trying to hide. "I'll be fine. And whatever Robert says, whatever truth comes out, we'll deal with it together." She squeezed his hands. "You're not alone in this anymore." Something shifted in his expression, some wall crumbling just enough to let her see the man beneath. "When this is over, if we both survive it, remind me that I owe you an apology for dragging you into my nightmare. You don't owe me anything except honesty." She stepped back, breaking the contact before she did something stupid like kiss him. "It's almost 11. We should go." The drive to Central Park was tense and silent. Victor sat beside her, checking and rechecking his phone, coordinating with the security team he'd positioned around the carousel. His earpiece was already in, and Lena could see him testing the connection, his jaw tight with concentration. "They're in place," he said as they pulled up to the park entrance. 4 positioned around the carousel with clear sight lines, 2 mobile units tracking the perimeter, and 2 more at the exits. If Robert brought backup, we'll know. And if he came alone like he said, then we have a conversation, and I finally get to look the man who destroyed my father in the eye. Victor's hand found hers, gripping tight. "You have 30 minutes. After that, I'm pulling you out whether you're done or not." "Understood." Lena squeezed back, then stepped out of the car into the cold November air. Central Park on a Saturday afternoon should have been crowded, but the weather had driven most people away. A few joggers passed by, bundled against the wind. Parents with strollers hurried toward indoor attractions. And in the distance she could see the old carousel, its painted horses frozen mid-gallop, waiting for spring when children would ride them again. She walked slowly, aware of Victor's voice in her ear, testing the connection one last time. "I hear you perfectly. Stay calm, stay alert, and remember, you're not alone." "I know," she murmured, and hoped he understood she meant more than just the security team. The carousel was deserted, its gates locked for the season. But sitting on a bench nearby was a man she barely recognized, older than the photo Victor had shown her, worn down by years of running and hiding. Robert Hart looked nothing like her father anymore. Where David was soft and defeated, Robert was lean and wary, his eyes constantly scanning like a hunted animal expecting the trap. He stood when he saw her, and something like relief crossed his face. "Lena, thank God. I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't." She stayed several feet away, hands in her pockets where they wouldn't shake. "Victor wanted to stop me. But he didn't, which means either he's more conflicted than I thought, or—" Robert glanced around, searching. "He's listening right now, isn't he? You're wearing a wire." "Yes." He insisted. "Smart. I would have done the same." Robert moved closer, and Lena forced herself not to step back. "You look so much like your mother. Same eyes, same stubborn chin. She would have hated what your father did, trading you like that." "Don't." Lena's voice came out harder than intended. "Don't talk about my mother or my father like you know them. You abandoned us 20 years ago. You don't get to have opinions about my family." "You're right, I don't." He sat back down, suddenly looking exhausted. But I never wanted to leave, never wanted to disappear. I was forced to choose between running and dying, and I chose survival. Maybe that makes me a coward. It makes you human. Lena sat on the other end of the bench, keeping distance between them. Victor said you stole $5 million and betrayed his father to the Castellanos. He said you got Alessandro killed. I did steal the money. That part's true. But the rest, Robert laughed bitterly. The rest is a story I've been too afraid to tell for 20 years because the truth would destroy more than just me. In her ear, Victor's voice was tense. Ask him what truth. Make him explain. Then explain it to me, Lena said. Make me understand why I should believe you over the man I married. Because Victor only knows half the story. The half his father wanted him to know. Robert leaned forward, elbows on his knees, speaking quickly like he might not get another chance. I was Alessandro's bookkeeper for 3 years. Good job, decent pay, and I was grateful because your father and I had always struggled. But about 6 months before I ran, I started noticing discrepancies in the accounts. Money moving in ways that didn't make sense. Meetings with the Castellanos that weren't about territory or business, but about something else entirely. What else? Drugs. Specifically heroin coming through the port. Alessandro had always refused to touch narcotics, said it was a line he wouldn't cross, that it destroyed communities and families. But Marco's father approached him with a deal too lucrative to refuse, millions of dollars for just looking the other way while shipments came through territory Alessandro controlled. Victor's voice crackled in her ear, sharp with denial. He's lying. My father would never... But Lena was watching Robert's face, reading the truth in his exhaustion, his fear. Keep going. Alessandro agreed initially, but he kept it quiet. Didn't tell his own people, didn't record it officially, just took the money and let the shipments flow. But I found the accounts, saw where the money was going, what it was buying, and when I confronted him, Robert's voice broke. He didn't deny it, said it was temporary, that he needed the capital for legitimate investments, that he'd get out once he had enough. But we both knew that's not how it works. You can't just walk away from the Castellanos. So what did you do? I told him I was going to the authorities, that I couldn't be part of poisoning communities, even indirectly. Alessandro begged me not to, said it would destroy everything he'd built, would get his family killed. But I couldn't let it go. So I took the money, the same money from the drug deals, and I gathered evidence. Bank statements, meeting notes, everything I could find, and I reached out to the FBI. In her ear, Victor's breathing had gone ragged. Lena pressed on, needing to hear the rest. What happened? The FBI was interested, very interested, but before they could move on the information, someone tipped off Alessandro. I think it was Marco's father, covering his own exposure. Alessandro realized I'd betrayed him, and he came for me. Robert's hands trembled as he pulled them through his hair. I ran, took the evidence and the money and disappeared. And then I heard about the ambush 2 weeks later, heard Alessandro was dead, and I knew they'd blame me for everything. But you gave information to the Castellanos, Lena said. Victor said you sold his father out. I traded information for protection, told them Alessandro was planning to cut them out, to go to the authorities himself and use me as the scapegoat. It was a lie, but it gave them reason to move against him while I got away. And yes, that makes me responsible for his death. But he wasn't the saint Victor thinks he was. The silence stretched while Lena processed this, while Victor's ragged breathing filled her ear, while 20 years of assumptions crumbled into something more complicated than either man wanted to admit. Do you have proof? She asked finally. Evidence of what you're saying? Some, not all. I destroyed most of it years ago when the FBI investigation died. But I kept insurance. Bank statements showing the payments, a ledger in Alessandro's handwriting documenting the shipments. It's hidden, but I can get it. Then why tell me this now? Why surface after 20 years? Robert's smile was sad and exhausted. Because Victor married you to get to me, and I couldn't let him use you without knowing the truth. You deserve better than being a pawn in a 20-year-old blood feud built on half the story. He stood, looking around nervously again. And because I'm dying, Lena. Cancer. 6 months, maybe less. I wanted to make things right before I go, even if that means finally facing what I did. In her ear, Victor's voice was rough with too many emotions to name. Tell him I want the evidence, everything he has, and I want it now. But before Lena could relay the message, Robert's expression changed. His eyes went wide, focused on something behind her, and he grabbed her arm urgently. We need to go, now. What? The Castellanos. They followed you. He was already pulling her toward the trees. Marco must have had people watching the park. They know I'm here. Lena turned and saw them. 4 men in dark clothes moving too purposefully through the sparse crowd, spreading out to cut off exits. Professional, dangerous. Exactly what Victor had feared. Victor's voice exploded in her ear. Get down! My people are moving in, but you need to find cover now! Robert pulled her behind the carousel's locked gates, and they pressed against the cold metal as chaos erupted around them. Victor's security team materialized from nowhere, intercepting the Castellano men with the efficiency of people trained for exactly this scenario. Shouting, the sound of fists on flesh, someone screaming for people to call the police. And through it all, Robert kept his body between Lena and the violence. This man she barely knew protecting her with the same instinct that had made him run rather than die 20 years ago. I'm sorry, he gasped. I'm so sorry I brought this to your door. It was already at my door the moment my father sold me to Victor. Lena held on to him, this stranger who was family, feeling the tremors running through his thin frame. Are you really dying? Yeah. Liver cancer. Ironic considering I barely drink. His laugh was strained. Listen, if something happens to me, the evidence is in a safe deposit box. Bank of Manhattan, 42nd Street, box 237. The key is taped under the bathroom sink in my apartment, 127 West 83rd, Unit 4B. Get it to Victor. Let him decide what to do with the truth. Nothing's going to happen. A gunshot cracked through the air, and Robert shoved her down hard, just as the carousel's metal structure sparked where a bullet struck. More gunfire, more shouting. And suddenly Victor was there, appearing from nowhere with a gun in his hand and murder in his eyes. He assessed the situation in a heartbeat. Lena on the ground, Robert shielding her, blood blooming across Robert's shoulder where he'd been hit. Something shifted in Victor's expression, some final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Get her out of here, Victor ordered his closest guard. Then to Robert, his voice complex with emotions Lena couldn't parse. You're coming with us. We need to talk. I can't. The Castellanos are being dealt with. Victor grabbed Robert's good arm, hauling him up with surprising gentleness. You want to make amends? You want to tell me the truth? Fine. But we're doing it somewhere you can't run, and I can't kill you in public. More of Victor's men appeared, forming a protective circle as they hustled Lena and Robert toward the waiting Mercedes. She could see the Castellano men being subdued, could hear sirens approaching, could feel the wire still transmitting every second of this disaster back to whoever was monitoring. They piled into the car, Robert bleeding and pale, Victor radiating controlled fury, and Lena caught between them, wondering how they'd gone from a simple meeting to a shootout in Central Park in the space of 10 minutes. Hospital, Robert managed. You need to shut up and let me think, Victor snapped. But his hands were already pressing against Robert's wound, applying pressure with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Driver, take us to Dr. Moretti's. Private entrance. The drive took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Lena held Robert's good hand while Victor kept pressure on his shoulder, and the irony wasn't lost on her. The three of them trapped together, bound by blood and revenge and 20 years of incomplete truth, racing toward answers none of them were ready for. Dr. Moretti turned out to be a thin, elderly man who asked no questions and worked with the calm precision of someone used to treating injuries that couldn't involve police. He set up in what looked like a private medical suite hidden behind a bakery and worked on Robert's shoulder while Victor paced and Lena sat in numb silence. Through and through, Moretti announced after 20 minutes. Missed everything important. He'll need rest and antibiotics, but he'll live. For now. For now, Robert echoed with bitter humor. 6 months, remember? Cancer doesn't care about bullet wounds. Victor stopped pacing and stared at him, really seeing him for the first time since the carousel. You're actually dying. Scout's honor. Want to see the medical records? I want to see the evidence. Everything you have on my father, the Castellanos, all of it. Victor's voice was steady, but Lena could hear the tremor underneath. And then I want you to look me in the eye and tell me if any part of your story was a lie. Robert met his gaze without flinching. The safe deposit box. 42nd Street, Bank of Manhattan, box 237. Keys in my apartment, 127 West 83rd. Everything's there. Bank statements, ledgers, even a few recordings I made before I ran. Take it all. Read it. And then decide if your 20 years of revenge were aimed at the right target. The silence that followed was devastating. Victor sank into a chair, his hands shaking now that the crisis had passed, and Lena watched 20 years of certainty drain out of him like blood from a wound. He was a good father, Victor said finally, his voice breaking on the last word. He taught me how to throw a baseball, made my favorite pasta every Sunday, sat with me when my grandmother died, and told me grief was just love with nowhere to go. He was good. People can be both, Lena repeated her earlier words, moving to kneel beside his chair. Good fathers and flawed men. It doesn't erase the love, Victor. It just makes it more complicated. I built everything on making his death mean something, on justice. He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much too young. What if it wasn't justice? What if it was just revenge for a man who maybe got what he'd earned? Then you decide what to do with that truth. She took his hands, feeling them grip hers like she was the only solid thing left. But you don't have to decide alone. Robert cleared his throat weakly from the examination table. For what it's worth, your father did love you. That was never a lie. He just made mistakes, same as everyone. Same as me, running instead of facing what I'd done. Same as you, building a life around grief instead of living one. Victor laughed, hollow and broken. You're giving me life advice while bleeding from a bullet wound you took protecting my wife. The irony is almost beautiful. Your wife who you bought to use as bait. We're all beautifully broken here. Robert's eyes closed, exhaustion and pain pulling him under. Get the evidence. Read it, then do whatever you need to do. I'm done running. If you want revenge after seeing the truth, I'll be easy to find. Cancer's already killing me anyway. Dr. Moretti administered something that made Robert's breathing even out into sleep, then discreetly left them alone. Victor and Lena sat in silence, his hands still gripping hers, while everything they thought they knew rearranged itself into patterns neither had anticipated. I need to see it, Victor said finally. The evidence. Before I make any decisions, I need to know exactly what my father did. Okay, we'll go to his apartment, get the key, go to the bank. Lena squeezed his hands. Together. Together, he echoed, and something in his expression softened. When did you become the strong one? Around the time you became human. She stood, pulling him up with her. Come on, let's go find the truth you've been chasing for 20 years. Just be prepared that it might not be the truth you wanted. Robert's apartment was exactly what Lena expected from a man who'd been hiding for 2 decades. Sparse, anonymous, ready to be abandoned at a moment's notice. They found the key exactly where he'd said, taped under the bathroom sink like the last piece of a puzzle neither of them wanted to complete. The Bank of Manhattan was still open when they arrived, and the manager recognized Victor immediately, ushering them into a private room without questions. The safe deposit box was small and unremarkable, and when Victor opened it with shaking hands, Lena watched 20 years of certainty die in his eyes. Bank statements showing deposits from shell companies connected to the Castellanos. A ledger in handwriting Victor recognized as his father's, documenting shipments and payouts with clinical precision. Photographs of meetings that should never have happened, and recordings, 3 of them. Alessandro's voice captured in conversation with Marco's father, negotiating terms that made Victor's hand shake so badly he nearly dropped the player. They listened in silence, heard Alessandro Romano, the good father who'd made pasta on Sundays, bargaining over heroin shipments like they were legitimate cargo. Heard him justify it as temporary, as necessary, as not really his responsibility since he was just allowing passage. Heard him become exactly what Robert had described, a good man making terrible choices for what he told himself were good reasons. When the last recording ended, Victor sat frozen for a long moment. Then, very carefully, he gathered everything back into the box and closed it. My father was a drug dealer, he said, his voice eerily calm. Not just passively allowing it, actively participating, taking money that came from destroyed lives and using it to build our legitimate businesses. Everything I inherited, everything I am, is built on poison. Your father made mistakes, Lena corrected gently. But you didn't know. And what you do with this knowledge now, that's what defines you, not what he did 20 years ago. Robert was telling the truth, all of it. He tried to do the right thing, and my father came after him for it. And I've spent 20 years hunting a man who was more honest than the one I was trying to avenge. Victor's laugh was shattered glass. And the Castellanos didn't murder my father. They executed him for planning to betray them, which, according to Robert's recordings, was exactly what Alessandro was planning to do. So what now? Lena asked. Victor looked at her and she saw something new in his eyes, not the cold certainty of revenge, but the complicated uncertainty of truth. Now I make a choice. Keep hunting Robert for crimes he committed while trying to expose worse ones? Go after the Castellanos for killing a man who was actively betraying them? Or let all of it go and build something that isn't rooted in blood and lies? Those aren't your only options. No? He stood, pacing the small room like a caged thing. What else is there? Forgiveness. Not for them, for yourself. For carrying this weight for 20 years when you didn't need to. For building your whole life around making someone else's mistakes mean something. She moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to look at her. Your father was flawed. Robert was scared. The Castellanos were protecting their interests. Everyone made choices, and those choices led to tragedy. But you don't have to make it worse by adding more violence to violence. You're asking me to walk away from 20 years of purpose. I'm asking you to walk toward something better, something that doesn't require blood to have meaning. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. You married me for revenge. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being just bait, and you stopped being just the monster. We could keep playing those roles, or we could choose something different. His hands came up to cover hers, and she felt him trembling. I don't know how to be anything other than this. Then learn. We'll learn together. She smiled, sad and genuine and terrified. I didn't choose this marriage, but I'm choosing what comes next. And I'm choosing to believe you're capable of more than revenge. Victor pulled her close suddenly, wrapping his arms around her like she was the only thing keeping him from flying apart. And maybe she was. Maybe that's what they'd become without noticing, two damaged people holding each other together in the wreckage of everyone else's mistakes. What do I do with the evidence? He asked into her hair. Whatever feels right. Destroy it, keep it, use it. Your choice. But make the choice for yourself, not for a ghost. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped around each other in a bank's private room, while outside the world kept spinning and Robert kept dying and the Castellanos kept existing, and none of it mattered quite as much as this moment, this choice, this chance to be something different than what they'd been forced to become. Finally, Victor pulled back and looked at her with eyes that were clearer than she'd seen them. I'm keeping the evidence, not to use, but to remember. That good people make bad choices, and revenge doesn't fix anything, and 20 years is long enough to carry hate. And Robert? Robert's dying anyway. He doesn't need my forgiveness, but I think I need to give it anyway. For both of us. Victor closed the box and handed it to the manager. Seal this. New number, my name only. If anything happens to me, it goes to my wife. The manager nodded and left them alone again. Lena watched Victor process everything, saw the weight of 20 years slowly lifting from shoulders that had carried it too long. The Castellanos will still come, she said. Marco knows about Robert now, knows you were using me. That doesn't just go away. No, it doesn't. But I'll handle them differently. Not with revenge, but with strategy. Make it clear that Robert is under my protection, that any move against him or you is a move against me, but that I'm not interested in escalating old wars. Victor's smile was grim, and if they're smart, they'll accept the new terms. If they're not, well, I'm still dangerous, just differently motivated. By what? He pulled her close again, and she felt his heart beating against hers. By protecting what matters. which used to be revenge but is starting to look a lot more like you. The admission should have terrified her, should have made her pull away and remind him that this marriage was forced, that she didn't choose him, that caring for your captor was textbook Stockholm Syndrome. But standing there in his arms with the evidence of his father's sins locked away and the future uncertain, Lena realized she didn't want to pull away. "We're both insane," she whispered. "Probably. But we're insane together, which has to count for something." They left the bank as the sun set, painting Manhattan in shades of amber and shadow. Victor's hand found hers as they walked to the car, and Lena let him hold it, let herself be held, let herself believe that maybe, possibly, they could build something real from the wreckage of revenge and lies. Robert was awake when they returned to Dr. Moretti's, pale but alert. He looked between them and saw something that made him smile weakly. "So, did you kill me in absentia, or are we good?" "We're not good," Victor said honestly. "You did terrible things, and so did my father, and I've spent 20 years becoming someone I'm not sure I like very much. But you're dying, and I'm tired, and adding your death to everything else won't fix anything. Forgiveness, didn't see that coming. It's not forgiveness, it's letting go." Victor sat across from him. "The Castellanos are the real problem now. Marco knows you're alive, knows where to find you. He'll come for you to tie up loose ends." "Let him. I'm dead anyway." "Or you go into hiding, real hiding, the kind I can provide. Medical care, protection, a place to die in peace instead of violence." Victor's expression was complicated. "You saved Lena today. Took a bullet meant for her. That earns you something, even if I hate that it does." Robert's eyes filled. "Why?" "Because she asked me to, and because I'm learning that revenge feels a lot less important than protecting the people who see you as human instead of monster." Victor stood. "Yes or no, but decide fast. Marco won't wait long." "Yes. God, yes." Robert reached out with his good arm, and after a long moment, Victor took his hand. "Thank you. For seeing past what I did to why I did it. Your father couldn't, but you can. Maybe you're better than both of us." "Maybe I'm just exhausted." Victor released his hand. "Dr. Moretti will move you to a secure location. You follow his instructions, you stay hidden, you live out whatever time you have left in peace. That's the deal." Deal accepted. They left Robert to Moretti's care and drove back to the penthouse in silence. The wire Lena was still wearing felt like dead weight, a reminder of a trap that had closed in ways none of them expected. Victor helped her remove it once they were home, his fingers gentle as they undid the connections. "Today was supposed to end with me having my revenge," he said quietly, packing the equipment away. "Instead, it ends with me having questions I can't answer and a wife I bought, but I'm starting to think might have been worth more than revenge anyway." Smooth talker. But Lena smiled, exhausted and genuine. "What happens now? With us? With the Castellanos? With everything?" "Now we figure it out as we go. I deal with Marco politically instead of violently. You decide if you want to stay in this marriage now that you know the full truth, and we both try to be better than the people who came before us." He pulled her close, and she went willingly. "I know I bought you. I know I used you. But if you give me the chance, I'd like to try earning you instead." Lena looked up at him, this complicated, dangerous, surprisingly human man who'd bought her for revenge but was learning she might be worth more than that. "You're asking if I want to stay. I'm asking if you'll give me the chance to make this real, to turn a transaction into something that matters." She should say no, should demand freedom, and run as far as possible from this life she never chose. But standing in his arms with the city glittering below and the future uncertain, Lena realized she didn't want to run anymore. "Ask me again in a month. When you've dealt with the Castellanos and Robert is settled and you've had time to process that your entire revenge was built on incomplete information." She smiled. "If you still want me to stay then, we'll talk." "A month." Victor pressed his forehead to hers. "I can work with that." And in the space between revenge and redemption, between transaction and truth, they held each other and hoped that maybe, possibly, they could build something that wasn't founded on blood and lies. The month that followed was unlike anything Lena had expected. Victor threw himself into damage control with the same intensity he'd once reserved for revenge. and she watched him transform from a man obsessed with the past into one cautiously building toward a future. He met with Marco Castellano 3 times in neutral locations, conversations that left him exhausted and tense but never violent. The terms he negotiated were simple. Robert Hart was under Romano protection until his death, which wouldn't be long. In exchange, Victor acknowledged that Alessandro's murder had been a response to betrayal, not unprovoked violence. The old war ended not with blood, but with uncomfortable truth. Marco accepted the terms, though Lena could see in his eyes during their second encounter at a charity dinner that he didn't trust the change. "Your father was predictable," he told Victor, while Lena stood beside her husband, playing the role that was becoming less performance and more reality. Emotional, reactive, easy to manipulate. "You, on the other hand, I can't read. That makes you more dangerous." "Or more reasonable," Victor countered smoothly. "My father built an empire on reaction. I'm building one on strategy. The question is whether you're smart enough to recognize the difference." They'd circled each other like wary dogs for another 20 minutes before Marco finally extended his hand. "To new understandings, then. And to your lovely wife, who seems to have done what 20 years of violence couldn't, made you human again." Lena had smiled and said nothing, but she'd felt Victor's hand tighten on her waist, possessive and protective, and something else that made her pulse quicken. Robert was moved to a private facility upstate, somewhere with views of mountains and medical staff who asked no questions. Victor visited him twice in that first month, conversations he never detailed, but that left him quieter, more contemplative. The third time he brought Lena with him. They found Robert in a sunny room that was more hospice than hospital, his frame even thinner than before, but his eyes clearer. He smiled when he saw them together, saw Victor's hand clasped with Lena's. "You look different," Robert observed. "Both of you. Like you've figured something out." "We're working on it," Lena said, settling into the chair beside his bed, while Victor stood at the window, looking out at the mountains like they held answers. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm dying," which is accurate. Robert's humor was dark but genuine. "The doctors say maybe 3 months now. The cancer's aggressive, but at least I'm comfortable. Better than I deserve, honestly." "Everyone deserves dignity at the end," Victor said without turning around. "Even people who've made terrible choices." "Speaking from experience?" "We all are." Victor finally faced them, and Lena saw the complexity in his expression, grief and anger, and something like acceptance all mixed together. "I've been thinking about what you said, about my father making mistakes, about good people doing bad things. I've spent 20 years trying to make his death mean something, but maybe the real meaning is learning not to repeat his mistakes." "And have you learned that?" Robert asked. "I'm trying." "Lena's helping." Victor's eyes found hers, and she felt the weight of everything unspoken between them. Turns out revenge is easier than redemption, but redemption feels better when you can sleep at night. "Your grandmother would be proud. She always said the hardest thing was knowing when to put down the sword." Robert shifted in his bed, wincing. "I'm sorry I can't give you more time to hate me. Dying this fast feels like cheating you out of proper closure." "I don't need to hate you anymore. It's exhausting. And you were right, my father wasn't innocent. Neither were you, neither am I, and spending what's left of your life proving who was more wrong seems pointless." Victor moved closer to the bed. "But I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. Did you ever regret it? Taking the money, running, all of it?" Robert was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant with memory. "Every day. I regret not being braver, not standing my ground, not finding a way to expose the truth without destroying myself in the process. I regret missing your father's funeral, missing my brother's life, missing the chance to know my niece as more than a stranger I'm asking to forgive me." His voice broke. "I regret everything except surviving, because dying 20 years ago wouldn't have fixed anything, and at least this way I got to see you become better than all of us." Victor's jaw worked as he processed this, and Lena watched him make peace with something she couldn't fully understand. Finally, he reached out and gripped Robert's shoulder gently. "Thank you for saving her, at the carousel. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. She's family, and family is the only thing that matters in the end. Everything else is just noise." Robert covered Victor's hand with his own trembling one. Take care of her. Not because you bought her or because she's useful, but because she sees you as human. People like that are rare, and you don't get many chances to keep them. I know. Victor's voice was rough. I'm learning. They stayed another hour talking about small things, the weather, the food, books Robert was reading. When they finally left, Lena took Victor's hand in the car and held it while he stared out the window at the passing landscape. Are you okay? She asked quietly. I don't know. I'm sad he's dying, angry that I wasted 20 years, relieved it's almost over, and terrified of what comes after. He turned to look at her. Is that normal? I think that's human, which is progress. Human, he laughed softly. A month ago, I would have said that was weakness. Now I'm starting to think it might be the whole point. Back at the penthouse, they fell into new rhythms. Victor still left for meetings, but he came home for dinner. They talked more, argued sometimes, found ways to exist in the same space that felt less like captor and captive, and more like two people learning each other's edges. Mrs. Chen watched them with knowing eyes and said nothing, but Lena caught her smiling more than once. 3 weeks into the month, Victor came home early carrying a canvas and painting supplies. He set them up in the library without explanation, and Lena stared at him in confusion. What's this? You have a degree in art history. I thought maybe you'd like to actually make art instead of just studying it. He looked almost shy, which was startling on a man who usually moved through the world with absolute certainty. Mrs. Chen mentioned you used to paint before your mother died, before college, before everything got complicated. Lena touched the canvas reverently, feeling something crack open in her chest. I haven't painted in years. Then maybe it's time to start again. Consider it payment for the month I asked you to give me. His smile was soft. You're choosing to stay in this marriage, in this life. The least I can do is make sure you have something that's yours, not mine, not ours. Just yours. She wanted to thank him, to explain what this meant, but words felt inadequate. Instead, she pulled him down and kissed him, properly this time, not the chaste press of lips from their wedding, but something real and wanting and terrifying. He froze for half a second, then kissed her back with an intensity that made her knees weak, his hands coming up to cup her face like she was precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. Was that choosing to stay? He asked roughly. That was choosing you. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, they feel like the same thing. They're not. Staying is obligation. You is choice. She smiled against his mouth. I'm choosing you, Victor Romano. Even though you bought me, used me, dragged me into your revenge, I'm choosing the man you're becoming over the one you were. His kiss this time was tender and devastating, and when he pulled back, his eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you're going to try earning me anyway, so I guess we'll figure it out together. That night they had dinner like always, but Victor kept looking at her like he was seeing something new, and Lena felt the foundation of their strange relationship shift into something that might actually last beyond obligation and revenge. The next morning, Lena started painting. She worked for hours, losing herself in color and texture and the simple joy of creating something beautiful from nothing. Victor found her that evening covered in paint and smiling wider than he'd ever seen. What are you making? He asked, studying the canvas that was still more chaos than image. I have no idea, but it feels good. She wiped paint on her jeans, leaving streaks of blue and gold. Thank you for this, for seeing me as more than the bait or the wife or whatever role I'm supposed to play. You were never just a role. I'm sorry it took me so long to realize that. They stood together in the library, surrounded by books and art supplies, and the quiet understanding that they were building something neither had planned but both desperately wanted. The month ended on a Tuesday. Robert had been moved to intensive care the day before, his body finally giving up the fight. Victor got the call at dawn and was dressed and out the door before Lena fully woke. She found him at the hospital 3 hours later, sitting beside Robert's bed holding the older man's hand while machines beeped their steady rhythm. He's been unconscious since last night, Victor said without looking up. They say it's a matter of hours now. Lena sat on Robert's other side and took his free hand. His skin was paper-thin and cold, his breathing labored. But when she squeezed gently, she felt the faintest pressure back. "Can he hear us?" she asked the nurse. "Maybe. We encourage family to talk to him. Sometimes it helps." So they talked. Lena told Robert about her painting, about finding joy again in something she'd lost. Victor talked about the business, about making changes that would move them further from violence and closer to legitimacy. And together, they told him he could let go, that they'd be okay, that his death wouldn't be meaningless because it had taught them both something about forgiveness and choice. Robert died just after noon, slipping away so quietly they almost missed it. One moment his breathing was labored, the next it simply stopped, and the machines confirmed what they already knew. Victor sat very still for a long time, still holding that cooling hand, and Lena watched 20 years of purpose drain away, leaving only grief behind. "It's done," Victor said finally. 20 years, and it ends with me holding the hand of the man I swore to kill, feeling sad that he's gone. That's called growth. It's called confusing as hell. He stood slowly, like his body hurt. "But you're right. He deserved better than my revenge, and I deserve better than spending my life hunting ghosts." They arranged a quiet funeral, just the three of them, Victor, Lena, and Mrs. Chen. Robert was cremated, his ashes scattered in the mountains he'd looked at during his final months. Victor spoke brief words about second chances and complicated legacies, and Lena cried for the uncle she'd barely known, but who'd died protecting her anyway. On the drive back to the city, Victor was quiet until they hit the bridge. Then he pulled over suddenly, parking in a spot that overlooked the water and the skyline beyond. "The month's up," he said. "You told me to ask again after I dealt with the Castellanos and Robert was settled and I'd had time to process everything. Well, I've dealt with Marco, Robert's gone, and I've processed more than I wanted to. So I'm asking, do you want to stay?" Lena looked at him, really looked, saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the hope he was trying to hide, the vulnerability of a man who'd dismantled his entire purpose and was trying to build something better from the ruins. He'd bought her for revenge, but somewhere along the way he'd started seeing her as human, as valuable beyond her usefulness, as someone worth choosing to love. "I'll stay," she said. "On one condition." His expression shifted, wary. "What condition?" "That this becomes real. Not a transaction, not an arrangement, but an actual marriage, which means you don't get to make all the decisions anymore. We're partners, equal, or I walk. I don't care how much money you have or how powerful you are. I won't be owned." Victor stared at her for a long moment, and she watched him wrestle with decades of control and dominance and the belief that power meant never surrendering. Then slowly, deliberately, he smiled. "Partners. Equal. I can work with that." He reached for her hand. "Though fair warning, I'm going to be terrible at it. I've spent 20 years being in charge of everything. Learning to share control is going to be messy." "Good thing I like messy." She laced her fingers through his. "We'll figure it out together. That's what partners do." "Together," he echoed, and pulled her in for a kiss that tasted like new beginnings and hard-won hope. The next 6 months were an exercise in learning how to be married when you'd started from obligation and worked backward toward love. Victor was terrible at sharing control, just like he'd warned. He made decisions without consulting her, scheduled things without asking, assumed his way was the right way because it had always been his way. And Lena called him on it every single time, refusing to be steamrolled even when it would have been easier. They fought. Long, loud arguments about everything from dinner plans to business decisions to whether she had the right to veto his security arrangements when they went out. Mrs. Chen learned to disappear during these battles, and more than once Victor slept on the couch because Lena refused to share a bed with someone who'd just treated her like property. But they also learned. Victor started asking instead of telling, consulting instead of commanding. He moved her from the guest room into their bedroom, and they navigated the intimacy of sharing space with someone you were choosing to love rather than being forced to tolerate. And slowly, carefully, the marriage that had started as a transaction became something that looked surprisingly like the real thing. Lena threw herself into painting with an intensity that surprised them both. She converted one of the spare bedrooms into a studio and worked for hours, creating pieces that were raw and honest and beautiful. Victor started bringing clients by to see them, and within 4 months she had her first gallery showing. The opening was small, intimate, and Victor stood beside her the entire evening, looking proud in a way that made her heart ache. "You did this," he said as they watched people examine her work. "Built something beautiful out of nothing. I'm in awe of you." "I had help. You gave me the space and time to find this again. I gave you supplies. You did the rest." He pulled her close, and she went willingly. "I'm learning that the best things I can give you are the ones that let you be yourself, not extensions of me. Look at you being emotionally intelligent and everything." She smiled against his shoulder. "Your grandmother would be proud. She would have loved you, probably would have liked you better than me. Definitely would have liked me better than you." He laughed, and the sound was free and genuine and nothing like the cold, controlled man she'd married 6 months ago. The Castellanos settled into wary peace. Marco tested the boundaries a few times, small provocations to see if Victor's new approach was real or performance. Victor responded with strategy rather than violence, economic pressure instead of bloodshed, negotiations instead of warfare. It was slower, more complicated, but it worked. And more importantly, it let Victor sleep at night without ghosts. 8 months after their wedding, Victor came home with paperwork that made Lena's stomach drop. "What is this?" she asked, staring at the legal documents. "Annulment papers. Well, divorce papers technically, since we consummated the marriage." He set them on the table between them, his expression carefully neutral. "You married me under duress. Your father sold you to pay his debts, and I used you for revenge. None of that was your choice. So I'm giving you one now." Lena's hands shook as she picked up the papers, scanning the legal language that would dissolve their marriage and set her free. Everything she'd wanted 8 months ago, handed to her without conditions or strings. "If you sign those, you get half of everything. The penthouse, the businesses, all of it. Community property, even though you never asked for it." Victor's voice was steady, but she could hear the fear underneath. "You'll have enough money to disappear, start over, build whatever life you want far away from me in this world. All you have to do is sign. And if I don't sign? Then we stay married. Not because you have to, but because you choose to. And I spend the rest of my life trying to earn what I should have asked for in the first place." He moved closer, and she saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. "I love you, Lena. I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you called me out for being a monster. Maybe when you painted your first canvas. Maybe it was always inevitable from the moment you said, 'I do,' and meant it as a challenge rather than surrender. But I love you, and you deserve to choose whether to love me back without obligation or fear hanging over you." Lena set down the papers with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. 8 months ago, she would have signed without hesitation, would have run as far and fast as money could take her from the man who'd bought her like property. But 8 months of watching Victor dismantle his revenge, of building something real from forced proximity, of learning that monsters could become human if you gave them reason to try, 8 months had changed everything. "You're an idiot," she said. Victor's expression crumpled. "I know. I'm sorry. I just thought, you're an idiot because I don't want half of everything. I want all of you. The good, the bad, the parts still learning how to be human. I want the man who bought me for revenge but learned I was worth more. I want the husband who fights with me because he respects me enough to let me win sometimes. I want the future we're building together, not the past that brought us here." Hope bloomed across his face like sunrise. "You're staying, even though you could leave?" "I'm staying because I could leave, because this is finally, actually, completely my choice." She moved into his arms, and they closed around her like coming home. "I love you too, you impossible man. And I choose you. I choose us. I choose this messy, complicated, beautifully imperfect marriage we've built from revenge and lies and somehow turned into truth." Victor kissed her like she was air, and he was drowning, and Lena kissed back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, he was crying, actual tears streaming down his face, and she'd never loved him more than in that moment of complete vulnerability. "Thank you. he whispered against her hair, for seeing past what I was to what I could be, for choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier, for loving me when I barely knew how to love myself. That's what partners do. We see each other's potential and help each other reach it. She pulled back just enough to look at him. Though I am keeping those papers, as a reminder that I stayed because I wanted to, not because I had to. Fair. Frame them. Hang them on the wall. Throw them in my face during arguments. He laughed through tears. Whatever you want. You've earned the right to remind me that you chose this. They burned the papers that night in the fireplace, watching legal freedom turn to ash while they built something better from the flames. And as the last page curled and blackened, Victor pulled a small box from his pocket. I bought you a wedding ring once, picked it out myself, had it sized, slipped it on your finger while you stood there hating me. But that ring was part of the transaction, part of the revenge. This one, he opened the box to reveal a simple platinum band etched with tiny flowers, delicate and beautiful, and nothing like the ostentatious diamond he'd given her before. This one is a choice, if you want it. Lena looked at the ring, then at the man offering it, and felt the last pieces of resentment and fear fall away. I want it. I want you. I want all of this, even the hard parts. Victor slipped the ring onto her finger beside the diamond, and she felt the weight of choice settling beside obligation, transforming both into something that mattered more than either alone. I have something for you too, she said, and led him to her studio. The painting she'd been working on for months was finally finished, a massive canvas that showed chaos resolving into order, darkness bleeding into light, two figures emerging from shadow to stand together facing dawn. It was abstract and emotional and utterly honest about everything they'd been through. It's us, Victor breathed, seeing it clearly. All of it. The revenge, the choice, the transformation. It's called earned, because that's what we did. We earned each other. She took his hand. It's yours. Not because you own me, but because I'm giving it freely. Because you've earned the right to have something I made with love instead of obligation. He pulled her close, and they stood together looking at the painting that told their story. The wedding trap that became a marriage, the revenge that became redemption, the transaction that became truth. And in that moment, surrounded by art and ash and the city glittering beyond the windows, they both understood that the best things in life were the ones you earned through choice, not the ones you took through force. 1 year after their wedding, they held a different kind of ceremony. Small and private. Just Mrs. Chen, and a handful of people who'd watched them transform from captor and captive into something that looked remarkably like love. They renewed their vows on the penthouse terrace at sunset, speaking words they'd written themselves about choice and partnership, and building futures from the ruins of revenge. I married you for all the wrong reasons, Victor said, his voice steady and sure. I used you, manipulated you, treated you like a means to an end, but somewhere along the way you became the end itself, the point of everything, the reason I learned to put down the sword and pick up something better. I'm choosing you, Lena, every day for the rest of my life, and I'm grateful you're choosing me back. Lena's turn came with tears already streaming. You bought me, owned me, dragged me into a revenge I never asked for, but you also saw me, listened to me, learned to value me beyond my usefulness. You gave me space to find myself again, and in finding myself, I found you. I choose this marriage, this partnership, this beautifully complicated love we've built from forced proximity and honest effort. I choose you, Victor, not because I have to, but because I want to, because you've earned it. They exchanged rings they'd already worn for a year, but the meaning was different now. Not obligation, but celebration. Not transaction, but triumph. And when they kissed, Mrs. Chen applauded, and the city spread below them like a promise that better things were always possible if you were brave enough to choose them. The next 5 years unfolded like a story Lena never could have written, but was grateful to live. Her art career flourished, galleries across 3 states showing her work, collectors paying ridiculous amounts for pieces that came from the rawest parts of her soul. Victor slowly transformed the businesses, moving further from violence and closer to legitimacy, though he never pretended to be entirely clean. Some stains didn't wash out, he told her, but you could choose not to add new ones. They fought, often and loudly, and with the passion of two people who'd learned that conflict could be productive if you fought fair. But they also loved fiercely, protected each other ruthlessly, and built a partnership that looked nothing like the transaction it had started as. Marco Castellano became an unlikely ally, respecting Victor's strategic mind enough to propose legitimate business ventures that benefited both families. They would never be friends. Too much blood under that bridge. But they achieved something better. Professional respect and the understanding that some wars were better ended through economics than violence. David Hart reached out twice in those 5 years. The first time, Lena refused to see him, too angry about being sold to find forgiveness. The second time, Victor convinced her to meet him, and she sat across from her father in a neutral restaurant and listened to him apologize with the broken sincerity of a man who'd lost everything that mattered. "I don't expect forgiveness," David said, his hands shaking around his coffee cup. "I just wanted you to know that not a day goes by that I don't regret what I did. You deserved better, deserved a father who protected you instead of trading you for his own life. You're right. I did deserve better." Lena's voice was steady. The anger burned down to something calmer. "But I'm not carrying your guilt for you anymore. You made your choice, and I've made mine. I chose to stay in this marriage, to build something real with Victor, to find joy despite how it started. That's not because of you or for you, it's for me." "Are you happy?" David asked, and the question was genuine. Lena thought about her studio, her art, the partnership she'd built with a man who'd learned to value her opinion as much as his own instincts. Thought about the life they were creating together, complicated and imperfect, and absolutely nothing like what either of them had planned. "Yeah, Dad, I am. Which is the best revenge I could ask for, being happy despite everything you and Victor did to prevent it." She left him sitting there with his regrets and drove home to the penthouse where Victor was waiting. When she told him about the conversation, he pulled her close and held her while she cried for the father she'd lost and the freedom she'd found. "You're stronger than both of us," he murmured into her hair. "Stronger than your father, who couldn't face his debts. Stronger than me, who built my life on revenge. You took the worst we could do and turned it into something beautiful anyway. We turned it into something beautiful, both of us, together." She pulled back to look at him. "That's what makes it matter, that we chose this, that we earned each other." 7 years after the wedding that started as a trap, Lena stood in the same penthouse, looking out at the same city that had witnessed her transformation from captive to partner. Victor found her there at dawn, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we've come. How different this is from what I imagined that first night." She leaned back into him. "I thought I'd spend my life hating you. Instead, I can't imagine my life without you. Best revenge either of us could have asked for, falling in love with the person we were supposed to use." He turned her to face him. "I have something to tell you, and I need you to know it's a request, not a demand. You can say no, and nothing changes between us." "That's ominous. What is it?" "I want to have a family with you, kids who grow up knowing they're loved and chosen and never ever used as collateral or weapons. I want to build something that isn't rooted in revenge or violence, but in the love we chose to create from the disaster we were handed." He cupped her face gently. "But only if you want it too. Only if it's your choice, not mine." Lena felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at this man who'd bought her for revenge, but learned to value her autonomy more than his own desires. Who was asking instead of demanding, requesting instead of requiring, treating her as an equal partner in building their future. "I want it," she said. "I want to build a family with you, to raise children who know that love is a choice we make every day, to show them that people can change and grow and become better than their worst moments." She smiled through tears. "But fair warning, I'm going to be the kind of mother who lets them make mistakes and find their own way. No controlling, no manipulation, no using them for anything except loving them. Deal. And I'll be the kind of father who learns from my mistakes, who chooses partnership over power, who shows them that strength isn't about control, but about knowing when to surrender." He kissed her softly. "We're going to be amazing at this. Messy and imperfect, and absolutely amazing." They stood together as the sun rose over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility. Two people who'd started as transaction and become triumph, who'd learned that the best revenge was living well and loving better, who'd proved that choice mattered more than circumstances and that earned love was worth infinitely more than forced obligation. And in that moment, looking at the future they were building together from the ruins of revenge and the foundation of choice, Lena understood something profound. Her wedding had been a trap, but she'd turned it into a doorway. Victor had bought her for revenge, but she'd taught him she was worth more. They'd both been prisoners of the past, but they'd chosen to set each other free. The city below them woke slowly, millions of people starting their days, living their lives, making their choices. And high above them, in a penthouse that had started as a prison and become a home, two people held each other and chose, once again, to stay. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. Because love, real love, was always a choice worth making. And that choice, made freely and renewed daily, was the sweetest revenge against everyone who'd tried to use them. Proof that even forced beginnings could lead to freely chosen endings. The transactions could become truth, and that the line between captive and beloved was shorter than anyone imagined when you were brave enough to cross it together. Their story had started with a wedding trap, but it would continue as something infinitely better. A partnership earned through choice, strengthened through struggle, and made real through the simple, powerful act of choosing each other, every day, for the rest of their beautifully complicated lives.